potential merger with the South York Multi-Academy Trust, which Fulford School is part of. I've not been party to any of those discussions. The outcome of this application has no bearing on what those discussions are around, but just in the interest of openness, wanted to make sure that members were clear about that, and just to be clear to everybody that I'm coming at this with an open mind.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Crackhill?
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to declare a non-prejudicial interest in item 5. Just to be transparent, I was a governor of Fulford School for 4 years, but that was over 10 years ago, and I haven't really had any connection to the school since then. So I have taken advice that agrees that is non-prejudicial.
Okay, thank you. Regular viewers will know we normally have 11 committee members, but there are just 8 of us at the moment. So we're missing 2 who are joining us a little bit later, who are Councillor Orrell and Councillor Perrott, and Councillor Melly sent her apologies. Can move on then to the minutes of the last meeting. If anybody has any comments, or you're happy for me to sign them as an accurate record? Councillor Fisher?
I have an amendment to the proposal for the minutes of the meeting on June the 10th. The decisions, as I understand it, should record all decisions made. And if you recall, it says after debate, Councillor Webb moved and Councillor Crawshaw seconded the application be approved. There was a prior motion to refuse that, which I put. So could I ask that that be recorded, please, by amending the minutes to after debate? It was moved by Councillor Fisher and seconded by Councillor Dobney. The application be refused on the grounds of inadequate car parking spaces, which would be detrimental to highway safety and the immunity of neighbours. On being put to the vote, the motion was not carried, and then we can proceed with the rest of it. Councillor Webb then moved. I think it's important that we record all decisions made, not just the ones that actually determine the application.
Seems reasonable to me. Has anybody got any comments on that, or can we assume we're all happy? Councillor Crawshaw?
I've no particular objection to that, other than I don't know what the standard practice is from Dem Services. I don't think we should do something that's different than what we would normally do in the way that we record win decisions. So if we're going to record that for all future applications, that's not a problem. But I don't think we should do something different for one application in one set of minutes. So it might be worth just going back to Dem Services just to confirm.
Chair, if I may, if it was proposed and seconded and a vote was taken, it should have been included in the minutes. So I'll make that amendment.
Yeah. Okay.
I will pass a copy of that to the Democratic Services officer, so she knows what I said. Thank you.
I'm sure that would be appreciated. So other than that, I can't see any other comments on the minutes. So if we move on then to public participation, we don't have any speakers under the general sort of public participation section, although we've got sort of numerous speakers later on. So I think we can move straight on to the plans list. And the first item up is Fulford School. Gareth, if you're able to give us any update in a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application at Fulford School on Fulfordgate. It's for the erection of a 2-storey teaching block following the partial demolition of the Hawking building, removal of temporary buildings, the erection of temporary buildings, temporary classroom buildings, that is, installation of an external lift to the Bronte building, and the creation of a vehicle access to the southern boundary of the site. As members will have read in the papers, it facilitates the expansion of the school from its current student roll of 1,625 to 1,860 students. We have a presentation. So this is the as existing in the demolition plan. So red shows areas to be demolished. That's existing permanent construction at the end of the Hawking wing. 2 modular classrooms. A 3rd modular classroom. It also shows the trees to be removed as part of the development. Proposed site plan. This shows the location of the two-storey extension to the Hawkins block, the location of the new lift tower, solar PV array on the roof of the sports hall, new areas of car parking along the northern boundary. And this proposal here is for a new access on the side of the tennis courts to Porter Avenue, which is part of the new Germanybeck development. The Hawking building two-storey extension in context with the existing service. New build looking from the west. Elevations in detail. So that's the east facing elevation, so facing towards Heslington and Heathcroft. The west facing, so the internal elevation, south elevation, north elevation. And the ground floor plan, the new wing here, first floor plan. Onto building elevation, so this is the lift shaft goes here on the south elevation. You can see it's on the east elevation. And this is a detail, not particularly clear detail, I'm afraid, showing the new access route to the boundary, western boundary of the site, the new access at about 6 metre wide carriageway and the tennis courts here. It's a couple of photographs. So here's the Hawking building. These are the modular classrooms to be removed as part of the demolished permanent buildings there. You just see Eastwood Avenue properties here. And it's a site of a modular classroom, which will be replaced by temporary classrooms whilst the construction works are being undertaken. This is an area of where car parking currently there's nose-in bays up to this curb detail. This is the fence line with Eastwood Avenue. The proposal here to facilitate another line of nose-in bays is to move the car parking, remove this this area of landscaping. The trees are on the other side of the fence, but as members will have read in the papers, the agricultural report is confident those trees can be retained with no dig method of construction and porous materials. This is Porter Avenue, and this is where the southern access will be created. At the moment, the road, it finishes about a metre, maybe 1.5 meters short of the boundary, but planning conditions on the Germanybeck site and the approved plans show it to be constructed up to the boundary. Some of the trees to be removed. And this is taken from the west, so this is a new area of open space. And these trees, field maple, lime trees, and Norway maples to be removed. We do have an update. Victoria, if you would mind going through this in front of members on the table.
Okay, just to briefly go through the update, we've received additional consultation comments from the Lead Local Flood Authority and the Ouse and Derwent Internal Drainage Board. there was some details submitted just while the report was being written. Unfortunately, they're not acceptable, but as we set out in the report in paragraph 5.34, it's considered that a suitable scheme can be achieved, and this can be secured by conditions that are already in the report 29, 30 and 31. We've received some comments from the Education Policy and Planning Officer, which is set out there. We've received one further representation of objection. Again, we've set out the main points there. It's considered that the additional representations and consultee comments have been assessed and the planning balance and the recommendation is unchanged from the published report. We've made requesting some minor amendments to conditions. So with condition 1, it's just a replacement drawing. Condition 6, 7, 9, 11, 14, 20, 25, 30, 34 have been slightly reworded to more clearly specify when the condition kicks in. And condition 18 is just to include an additional plan. That's the update.
Okay. Just note before we continue that Councillor Perrott managed to get here just before we started this item, so is able to participate. And before I just ask if there are any questions, just if members just be as sort of clear and loud as possible, and use your microphone because this room doesn't have a hearing loop. So for anybody needing that, that'd be appreciated. But are there any questions for officers at this point? Councillor Crackhill?
Thank you. Yes. My first question is really, I've got a couple of questions, I think, for officers just now. The first one is just about the legal status of the access road as it runs through the site. And I know we've got a number of conditions in the paper, so 23 to 26, I think, and 27, that make certain restrict access to school buses, cyclists, pedestrians, require that the road must be built, etc., etc. And I think the school will install gates, which presumably they'll lock and unlock each day. I don't know, I presume that's the idea. So I suppose my questions are, how far can the school change how the road is used without coming back for permission? And what are the requirements on the school to maintain the road and maintain a sort of safe travel along the road between buses and pedestrians and cyclists?
I think in terms of their on-site management, I would say that's the responsibility of the school to ensure that what goes on within the school grounds is safely managed. There is someone from the school coming to speak, so it might be a question for them, but we wouldn't normally seek I would suggest we wouldn't normally seek to manage how the operation how the vehicles move around the site themselves, unless there's some sort of external issue on the surrounding highway network. In terms of maintenance, there's a requirement that so condition 27 requires that the southern access point is restricted to the use of school buses, cyclists and pedestrians only. There isn't a condition, there's a condition required that it's the road is constructed and made ready for use before the extensions are occupied. And also that it is retained for the life of the development.
Where's the retain for the life of the
So
development?
that's number 28. Oh, that's sorry, that's for parking and manoeuvre. Yeah, condition 28 talks about the areas for parking and manoeuvring of vehicles are retained to the life of development. I guess your question raises the fact that there's possibility for interpretation of that. So it is possible to reword the condition, one of the conditions, or introduce a new condition regarding the maintenance of the access road as well.
Because
retaining the access road.
because it is essentially an unadopted private road.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. And I suppose my other question, you may just have a similar answer in that case. Except, well, no, I suppose I couldn't find in the paper, in the documents, a kind of plan of, maybe that's just me, I couldn't find a plan of the road showing exactly how pedestrians and cyclists will be kept safe from the buses when they're parked up for drop off and pick up. Because that separation between pedestrians and cyclists is already an issue for the school, I think, at the moment. And I'm just not clear how that works. Do we have a plan that shows how that works?
The proposed site plan, you can see there's this area here, and the papers say that the students using the buses will be centred around the southern part of the tennis court. That's for cyclists.
Yeah. Mm.
We understand that the students aren't allowed on their bikes within the site, and so they'll wheel them out to the point of the school access around those pavements.
So it'll really depend on supervision, which, yeah.
Yes, and on-site management as exists at the moment.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I think I had Councillor Crawshaw before Councillor Ward. It's a lot easier when they're blue hand.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions that are sort of about numbers, really, and then one a little bit more specifically. So, page 14, paragraph 3.5 and 3.6 and 3.7 sort of talk about numbers of trees that will be removed as a result of this application. I think I total it at 33, but I just wanted to confirm that that was a correct addition, because some of the reading of it didn't give a kind of a total number anywhere that I could see. And then there's a reference made, I think it's page 31. Yeah, page 31, paragraph 5.21, that says some of these trees might have to be removed even if the access road and access point weren't constructed. I think that's referring to the same trees, and I just wanted to clarify that. And when we're saying some of them might have to go anyway, how many of those 33 might be at risk, irrespective of whether this application goes through? So that's my first one, and then another question about numbers of buses. So I'll maybe come to Helen in a minute.
Right. Along the sort of the western boundary and to the southern access, I think there's a total of 15 trees being removed. And then I think there's a handful of trees being removed sort of within the soft landscaping within the car park there. With regards, I can't give you specific numbers of which how many trees are growing into the fence. Don't think I've got that in front of me, but that there's significant land level difference between the trees and the road, and I think there's already been some impact by movement of earth already. So the life of them is already limited, of some of the trees. I couldn't say if it was all of them.
I guess it's just in terms of us weighing up the amount of harm of the application. What I'm just trying to understand is, you know, if there's 3 or 4 of the 15 lime trees that would go anyway, that might be different than if you're saying actually probably the majority of them would need to be removed at some point reasonably soon.
I think given the proximity to the fence and the land level difference, I think it's likely that the majority of the trees would have to be removed anyway.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And then in terms of buses and bus numbers, let me just find the right part of the report. It was around the numbers of buses leaving the site, and I think at the moment it said, oh yeah, that's it. So page 28, paragraph 5.8 says currently at least 14 buses are used to transport students. So that says that's a minimum of 14 buses, and I'm just wondering if the at least means that it could be quite considerably more than that. And then my understanding of what we've sort of said in terms of the highway impact is that given the number of buses that there currently are, the number of additional buses wouldn't make a significant impact on the highways as it currently is. But I'm conscious that the school has expanded sort of as schools do, you know, incrementally it has expanded over a period of time. And if we were looking at the expansion to where it would end up if this application goes ahead versus where it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, would we still be considering it as a not significant impact on the highways? I'm not sure how you assess what the level of impact is. I just wanted to explore that a little bit, I suppose.
My name is Helen Verscher. I'm the Traffic and Highway Development Control Manager for City of York Council. In response to the number of buses, the information we have from the school is that at the moment there's 14 buses. I guess this may vary if they've got activities or not, but generally 14 buses. And the additional pupils would lead to 2 to 3 additional buses. So that's why we estimated that that wouldn't be significant. In terms of what happened 10 years ago, I do not know that. So I don't know how many buses were there 10 years ago, but that might be a question for the applicant, I guess. But at the moment, what we see on the network is that it is manageable, although sometimes difficult. But we can't say that an extra 2 or 3 would have such a significant impact that we would not be happy with it. So
if I may, Chair, so just to sort of understand that and I guess if you, I appreciate that you can't answer what it was 10 years ago or whatever, but if you're looking at a impact on an already difficult situation and you concluded that it wouldn't have a significant impact because it was already difficult, if it was a change from, say, a situation where it was manageable and it wasn't difficult and then became a difficult situation, you would be saying it does have a significant impact. But is that, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but is that the kind of way in which you would approach this?
The way we would look, be it on a network that is very busy or not so busy, the way we would look at it is anything under 30 two-way trips in the peak time is very difficult to assess an impact of, because actually the statistical errors, modeling errors, 30 trips is actually quite low in terms of what we can model reliably. And in this case, when we looked at, I assessed it myself on the based on the data that we got from the school and challenging some of the data, and we would be below 30 trips, assuming that obviously we've got these 2 access points, north and south. If they were all in the same access, that's different, but because it's split, then we get below that level. So we can't say that it would have a severe impact.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Wardley.
Thank you, Chair. Right, okay. On page 18, 3.29, it says that the eastern section of the Eastwood Avenue will result in loss of outlook due to the height and location of the two-storey extension. It will also be, there will be an intrusion of disturbance of the use of parking spaces. This is from Fulford Parish Council. And then they say that the loss of the buffer that is currently exists between the car park and the garden boundaries, which was presumably intended to lessen the disturbance for residents. It's obviously been put in there for a reason. So why is it being taken out? And is it being taken out? I'm just a bit concerned about, obviously, yeah, the noise levels and things. And it's more overlooking and everything.
I think they're referring to the additional parking spaces along the northern boundary, which back onto Eastwood Avenue. There is some soft landscaping is being removed to create additional parking spaces. Public protection team have assessed that, and they didn't have concerns regarding sort of any noise implications.
And my next question is pretty similar on page 15, 3.9. It says about the 43 parking spaces, and there's a potential threat of loss of trees, and there's possible loss of amenity. How much amenities is it going to be? Is there going to be an impact on, and what's been done to protect their amenities?
Again, I think this is referring to the same parking spaces along the northern boundary. The soft landscaping is being removed, so there is going to be some harm to the visual amenity and the character. The landscape architect is confident that the trees can be protected, and we have put a condition on there, which I'm just trying to find. Sorry. Condition 18, which says that it must be constructed in accordance with the arboricultural impact assessment. And in the planning update, we've also added a plan there, which is also specific.
Sorry, I just need to clarification, because I thought Gareth, I'm probably wrong. I thought Gareth said that they were okay to stay in your presentation, those trees.
Yes.
And it says only a potential loss. So is that in with the 33 trees that Councillor Crawshaw was on about, or no, are they extra?
No, those trees are being retained. As you can see, the soft landscaping will be removed, and there'll be parking spaces of a no-dig construction, which, talking to our landscape architect, she's confident that the trees can be retained if they keep to the arboricultural impact assessment.
But it still says there's a potential threat of tree losses. So can they, if they don't do it properly, they can just come down? Like there's no protection for them at all?
Well, they're not covered by a tree preservation order. So they could, at the moment, they could be removed. I think the landscape architect's view was that they're not worthy of tree preservation order because of their location. Okay, away from public use.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Webb, and then I'll come back to Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you. Thank you. I think my question's about off-site parking. I know that there is an increase in parking spaces, as we've just mentioned, but actually there's quite a large increase in the number of students and number of teachers. What is the risk of off-site parking, and actually have we done any modelling about where that would likely be if there was any, and what effect would that have on access and leaving the site, particularly for these large number of buses. Because obviously that could be if buses are having to pull out around cars along a narrow street, for example. Any thoughts?
There is a risk of parking in the surrounding area. There is already a risk. I think it's already happening. Obviously difficult to identify, but and there is a risk obviously of this parking also happening on the Germanybeck side. And the way we would manage it is as we manage other parking difficulties, double yellow lines, loading bands, zigzags, etc. to manage. And obviously it can be timed for school times. And so we would have to manage this.
Just a follow-up in possibly for Gareth in terms of planning, in terms of here tonight, is there anything specific that we could do to aid that? You know, I don't know, conditioning that it's checked on a regular basis or something like that. Thinking out loud, you possibly don't have to answer me right now, but have a think about it.
And what we have is there's a condition for the travel plan. The school has a travel plan at the moment, so we look to mitigate car journeys by implementing the travel plan. There's also an increase of in car parking on the site, and cycle parking is part of this development. I'll come back to you on the other one. I need to think about it.
When we had a similar application at Archbishop Fulfordgate, there were similar concerns in Badger Hill. I think as part of that travel plan, did we condition that if res parking was needed, that the school paid for it rather than the residents?
I think at Badger Hill, because it was already in the area that was covered by the university having to look at res park because of overspill. I think the opposite was the case, that it was already covered. Sorry, it's been lost.
Well, if we leave that for a minute.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up, there's comments specifically on page 18, paragraph 3.31, 3.32 from Fulford Parish Council, and then there's various references made in some of the objection comments around assurances or agreements that may or may not have been made around the Germanybeck development and how that might impact, mitigate on some of the travel movements around here. And from reading some of the comments here, it seems to be almost conflicting proposals and assurances. So I think that there's perhaps complaints from one side of the new residents in Germanybeck that they weren't aware of agreements or proposals that there may or may not have been. And then on the other side, people believe that agreements were made and assurances given that haven't been followed through. And I just wondered if we could clarify what agreements have and haven't been made around the Germanybeck development and its impact on the Fulford School site, and anything that's possibly been said about how that might alleviate problems or might mitigate impacts.
As part of the Germanybeck housing development was granted permission following a call-in call-in by the Secretary of State. So the decision was made by the Secretary of State, and that had a condition on the outline saying that the vehicle access had to be built up to the requiring the provision of vehicular access to Fulford School from the south. And that was shown and has been shown on the reserve matters planning commissioners. But we're unaware there's no planning policies, there's no planning obligations in terms of how that should be used, or I think some of the residents referred to it being intended that all the school traffic should come from the south, and there's no written obligation or planning policy to land, as far as I've been made aware of. That's my fault.
Thank you. So just to be completely clear, because I think that this may end up being a quite significant part of this application, we're not aware as a planning authority of any agreement or assurance having been given out beyond anything that might be referenced in this report, that there's just an agreement that there is to be a road built up to the edge of the Fulford School site, and there's nothing beyond that in terms of how that road should be used, how the school should use that road in terms of access into and from the site.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Apologies, one more from me. I'd just like some clarification on page 15, 3.11. Consideration should be given to applying a living roof on the flat component of the proposed new build block. And I was just wondering if there was reasons why that hadn't been done. Thoughts around that? Was it in discussions with the applicants, or yeah, thank you.
The comments were put to the applicant and the agent, and they didn't want to take it forward. It might be a question for them.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move on now to our public speakers, and we'll. Oh, sorry, Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to go back to the trees. I'm assuming we don't have the tree officer here to respond. Right, okay, so makes it a bit difficult. But on page 14 at 3.7, the landscape architect has commented that although the submitted tree report classes these trees as category C, she isn't clear why they're not categorised as B. That's the trees along the access route that are near the fence. So I suppose I would really just have liked to be able to ask the tree officer, you've already been asked this, but I find it very difficult to make a judgment without knowing how many of these trees might have how short a life expectancy, because I'm not really taking from this that these trees are all in danger. I'm taking that they present a very significant contribution to the amenity and the views, particularly from School Lane side of the development. And so it's difficult really to make any further judgment on that without actually be able to have that reply from the tree officer, really.
Is there any comment on that? I guess a bit more of a statement, I guess.
I don't think there's any. The report doesn't underplay how important those trees are. There is a planning balance to be made in terms of why they need to be taken out and how important they are in visual amenity terms. Some of them are trying to look through the comments to see if I could find any reference to how many of them might be compromised because of where they're growing, because of the land level changes. I haven't been able to do that. But we're not trying to suggest that they're unimportant.
Thank you.
Don't know if it'd be possible to carry on looking, see if we can find a number. Probably got about 40 minutes of public speakers
Yeah.
to
To make a choice between.
give a chance. So I think we can now move on to our public speakers. I can't see anybody waving at me. And there was just as well the other issue of the travel plan and what potentially could be done to, I guess, to make sure that the burden of any further things like rest parks don't fall on the residents if they do prove necessary later. But if we could have our first speaker then, who is John Hewood. I think you've got one of 3 tables to choose from. Yeah, so you need in front of you on that machine, there's a little button which says mic. You press that, it should go green.
Yes, it seems to be on now. You can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you, and you're able to take your mask off when you're sat down. Might
I'll take it.
as well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so you'll get 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a warning. It's about 30 seconds to go, and then there may be some questions from the committee afterwards.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. You feel free to make a start in your own time.
Thank you. I've lived next to Fulford School for 36 years, and like many neighbours, I object not to the school's expansion, but to its transport proposals. I'll start with my conclusion. We ask you urgently to set these transport proposals aside briefly for a little more consultation and research. First of all, why more consultation? The school has consulted us, but only with this consultation questionnaire, which you have, sent only to some residents who were swamped by the school community and seeking approval of an expansion of which it gave no details. We didn't think this met the Regional School Commissioner's requirements, but she rubber-stamped it so astonishingly that we've lodged a formal complaint with the Department for Education. But you needn't rubber-stamp it, we trust you won't. Head teacher Mr. Lewis may say too late now, but he has had a year to consult us better. We still hope at best as promised to have all school buses and much other traffic removed from worn-out Fulfordgate to purpose-built access via Germanybeck. Mr. Lewis blocks us, pleading planning officers' constraints. They say they can only do what he allows. We think these people have more in common than what divides them, and we'd like them to cooperate to see if they can reverse the bus flow to come and go via Germanybeck. But second of all, why more research? If our promise is ignored and we have to share with Germanybeck, then at worst, sharing must be fair sharing, not that shocking condition 27 that no school vehicles except buses should go via Germanybeck. There's much non-bus school traffic, community use, deliveries, construction traffic. School expansion will bring huge construction traffic. So more research is essential because the sole reason given for condition 27 is that it's what the school assumed in its information, and your planning officer, rather than pausing now to get better information, intends for this flimsy reason to lumber us, not even with a fair share of school traffic, but with almost all of it forever. That's intolerable. If recommendation 27 stays, I imagine some of us might seek legal opinion, but if it survives, we'll have to live with it, and so will you.
Left. Thank you. So do the committee have any questions? Sorry, if you bear with us a second, I'm just asking. Can't see any, so yes, thank you.
No,
You can
okay.
take your seat back. If we could move on then to Dominique Healy, who's dialing in. So I'm wondering if you can hear me, Miss Healy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You should have heard that you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a warning, it's about 30 seconds. And then if you could hang on the line when you've finished. Yeah, but if you'd like to make a start in your own time.
Okay. But again, not on Hayward, I'm only addressing the travel transport plans in this application. My key points really is the planning officer's report of the 2nd of July gives a summary of objections from the parish council, the York Civic Trust, as well as residents and neighbours of mine, but it fails to adequately consider them, and it actually does not quantify the actual impact on residents. There is ongoing harm and
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can hear you, but if you could go back about 15 seconds or so.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, it might be easy just to restart, actually.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now at the moment. Yeah, maybe just restart, please.
The report of the 2nd of July gives a summary of objections, but it fails to consider them adequately or quantify the actual impact on residents. It minimises ongoing harm to local residents and brushes away future harm. The application's travel plans undermine both the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 and the National Planning Policy Framework, as it does not minimise or separate pedestrian, car and bus users, but instead actually increases the number of all of them using the standard cul-de-sac Fulfordgate, and indeed it also encourages increased cycle numbers. As one councillor has already stated in this meeting, there does not seem to be a proper plan to keep them separate. If the application were to conform to the National Planning Framework, all buses would be diverted to the purpose-built Germanybeck access road and away from Fulfordgate, Heslington Lane and Main Street, which is actually a key access point to and from York. The report further recommends in condition 27 that cars continue to only use Fulfordgate entry and exit, leaving residents with no mitigation from existing. Currently, there are actually 16, making an average of 64 separate trips each school day, plus an estimated 180 staff and student cars, 100 parent cars for drop-off and pick-up, plus some 500 to 800 pedestrians. There will be
Sorry, you seem to have cut out completely there for the last 10 seconds.
Sorry. I'm very sorry. I have a terrible signal. Is this better?
Yes, that's better. You stopped at around 500 pedestrians.
500 plus pedestrians, all using the same very small cul-de-sac. The transport plan is also flawed, as it contains an inaccurate mapping of current travel plans, as it was done during lockdown, where there was no or little traffic in the surrounding area. It fails to mention use of the school at weekends and in evenings, despite the application as a whole asking for an increase in the number of community activities. It fails to provide concrete details on reducing car parking in the local area, and it also fails to provide sufficient car parking spaces as required in legislation. I should also note that Fulford School built the tennis courts with the knowledge that they would largely block access to the new access road, which had already been proposed in the Germanybeck application. Local residents have been failed by the council through its lack of oversight in the original planning application. I should note, I request that the planning committee reject the current travel plan and addresses through a stakeholder dialogue, including residents, the continued concerns of local residents and comes back with new transport conditions for the application. I also note that the committee should reject the transport plan, ask the school to A, undertake a proper consultation on transport planning with residents, and B, consider the continued use of existing bus parking within the school, which would allow both entry and exit by Germanybeck. The solution should be fair to all, and if this application goes ahead, the council is failing in its duty of care towards local residents and in its due diligence in assessing and approving this application as a whole without more conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just ask if the committee have got any questions at this point. I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your comments, Ms Healy. And you're able to sort of leave us at this point, but you should be able to continue watching on the council's YouTube channel. So thank you. If we could then move on to Vivian Clare.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, if you've got your mic on, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there are many objections to this very rushed application, but we live in Eastwood Avenue, and I'm going to concentrate on the residential amenity for residents in Eastwood Avenue. We are actually in the house that's closest to the proposed Hawkins block to be constructed and the northern perimeter car park, which is going to greatly affect us. So we've got some, what we think are reasonable requests. We have a very tranquil, wildlife friendly garden, birds, hedgehogs, bats. And at present there is a buffer between us and the very limited parking behind the house. So the proposed car park that goes right up to the boundary fence will lead to an awful lot of noise, air and light pollution. So we request that the numbers of the parking spaces behind our houses is limited in order to maintain a buffer. We also, if the car park close to the boundary is to be constructed, we would request that it is not to be used outside school hours, and also that the lighting is not on, it is turned off at night time. We request that there's a more robust travel plan where, for example, sixth formers should be forbidden to drive to school. So the car park on the northern perimeter is not actually needed. I mean, there are, after all, more sustainable methods of transport available. And there are other methods of deterring car use, and these need to be explored. We request that trees and landscaping are given more importance than cars, and that the shrubs, trees and landscaping at the rear of houses on Eastwood Avenue, they are important to wildlife and they should not be destroyed for the convenience of car users. The other point is we have got the works compound, the offices, the mess, the toilets that are during the construction adjacent to two sides of our boundary. And there is a two-storey container office that will be overlooking our house and garden. And I just think that is unacceptable.
30 seconds left.
We would ask that the two-storey works offices should be located elsewhere, as well as hopefully the mess, the WCs, etc., because of the noise. You know, I just feel in general that the site is just too limited for this size of expansion. At the moment, there's a car park surrounding it, trees being taken out, and really this is not a sustainable
if you could wind up,
application.
please. Sorry, if you could wind up, please.
Oh, right. Well, I'll just say the destruction of ecology, the loss of residents' amenity, more traffic chaos, lack of space within the school and on the field are the result, would be the result of this application if it goes ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. See a question from Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming to speak to us today. I just wanted to clarify a point that you said about the parking, and you said that would it be possible to prevent parking outside of school hours? And I just wanted to understand what you meant by school hours. Do you mean sort of Monday to Friday, the 9 to 3 or 4 time, or because obviously a lot of teachers, I guess, will be there till 5, 6, maybe even a bit later sometimes.
Yeah.
So is it sort of the school working day that you mean? Rather
I do
than,
mean that.
yeah.
I do mean that. I'm thinking of night school and weekend sports activities. I don't see why the new car parking that is close to residents' houses needs to be used. There would be sufficient elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any further questions, so yeah, thank you for your comments this evening. If we could move on then to Steve Lewis, who's the head teacher. He's speaking in person, but we also have Alison Kelly, who's the CYC project manager for education, who's on the phone. So if there are any questions for her. Oh, apparently she's here as well.
Yes, hi, I'm Steve Lewis. I'm the head teacher of Fulford School and also the CEO of South York Multi-Academy Trust, of which Fulford School is part of. Fulford School has always had its foundations in our community and placed great emphasis on meeting its civic responsibilities, not only for the children who go to our school, but to the wider educational and social structures of the city. We provide an outstanding education to thousands of York residents. Generations of families within York have benefited not only from the teaching within the school, but also the family and friendship bonds fundamental to a community school. As a comprehensive school, we educate all children, irrespective of social background or academic ability. We provide a vital link in a chain that gives parents and carers within our catchment area the surety of educational provision from 3 to 19. We all know the importance of transitions in our young people's lives. We almost want to know young people's lives, the importance they have on family stability and social cohesion. At this time, more than ever, as we continue to work within the fallout from the pandemic and disrupted educational provision, the role our schools have in bringing stability in the lives of our young people and wider community is clearly evident. Fulford School is chronically oversubscribed. As head teacher, I do all I can to enable our Year 6 catchment children to come to their secondary school, to attend the same school as their brothers and sisters, and to maintain and build on friendships forged in their primaries and their communities. It is what parents and carers expect and what is best for our children. Children we all have responsibility for. The demographics around our school have changed. Decisions have been made outside of my remit around the development of our catchment area. What is very much in my remit and that of CYC and the community of York is to cherish, care, and above all, ensure that our children have an outstanding education in their local community. The school was approached by CYC to expand, to ensure enough secondary school places in our catchment to transition. We have done that within the constraints of the buildings and resources we have. We have no capacity left, and unless we are able to complete the building works you are considering today, the link in that chain of community education for children in their catchment school from 3 to 19 will be broken for a sizable number of children. There will be no place in their secondary school, no transition with family and friends, and we as a community will have let our children down. As head teacher, I am desperate to continue providing an inclusive, comprehensive and outstanding education for our children. I'm not blind to the irritation and disruption that can be caused to our neighbours by traffic flow around the school. My expertise lies in education and not planning, but I believe we engage with experts in their field, and with the constraints of the site, we have developed a plan that minimises impact on both Fulfordgate and Germanybeck, but I acknowledge it does not fully satisfy either. I'll finish up by saying our buildings let our current pupils down. They should not have to study, socialise and learn in crowded classrooms not fit for purpose. They deserve better, and I'm speaking for them. I am speaking for the families whose children have yet to enter secondary education, who, when it comes to transitioning at the end of Year 6 into their local school with all its deep-seated community and educational connections, they will find that without approval to expand, there will be no place for them at Fulford School. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just ask if there are any questions. I see a few hands. I think Councillor Webb, then Councillor Wardley, Councillor Crawshaw, and then Councillor Crowfield. Councillor Webb would like to start.
So you've got most of the committee, Mr. Lewis.
It does. Popular.
Thank you for coming along tonight, and just thank you for everything you're doing at the moment in education. So it is difficult. I've got sort of 3 questions. My first one is hopefully quite quick. It's what is your time scale for sort of development? When do you want, you know, children to be walking into those new classrooms? What's the sort of time scale around that? My second question is around the condition 27 that has already been mentioned. And Alison, you might be able to help with this one. I suppose it's why is that condition for school buses, cyclists and pedestrians only in there? And then my third question is, I'm a teacher myself, and I know that there will be a site management plan for how you get children on and off site safely who aren't on buses, for example. Could you just outline a little bit of detail around your thoughts around that? Thank you.
Will do. September 2022 is when we would like the site to be ready for occupation. In terms of organising the school site, the reason why we are looking to have one-way traffic going through in terms of buses and not having cars coming the opposite way is because of the constraints of the amount of land that we have and the safety of the children, something we need to be able to manage. If you've ever been to Fulford, you've ever seen the operation of getting buses into school and getting buses out of school, it's very tight. It has to be, because we have an awful lot of children in a constrained site, and it's obviously our number one priority is the safety of the children. So we have to be able to design the site which makes sure that the children are safe. So we don't want two-way traffic coming in. We would close the gates at Germanybeck to keep site security when they're not being used. So the access would need to be through Fulfordgate. And sorry, the third question was?
So my third question is about actually how do we prevent children who are not on buses but are cycling or walking site? How are you going to keep them segregated or safe from?
So we have adult supervision by senior leaders, by classroom staff at both the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and we have very clear pathways for pedestrians. You're quite right, we don't have cyclists on site. They need to disembark from the cycle and walk that through, and we have a different pathway for buses, access to buses, access and pedestrian access, which children with bikes would be carrying their bikes, running their bikes in terms of making sure that they're outside of the school site before they get onto their bikes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wardley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't quite know if you're the person that can help, but with this, but the lady, one of the speakers, was asking about the work offices and WCs. Could they be moved somewhere else?
As I say, I've got education expertise, but unfortunately, I think there is somebody who will be coming to speak later on who might be able to answer that.
Oh, right, okay.
With more clarity than I could.
And you can't help with the parking either?
In terms of?
In terms of reducing the parking so the buffer can remain, and using it as an overflow car park rather than using it.
We committed to community use of the school site. I think that's really important for our community. In terms of the number of parking spaces, they've been carefully worked out by those people who have been leading our project to make sure that we've got the right number of parking space. I think that, yeah, it really does lie outside of my expertise to know about the buffers from the fence to the car park, and hopefully the people who are leading the expansion will be able to answer that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I had a couple of questions for you. Your answer to that question might preclude the answer to this question, which was just following on from the resident who spoke just before you, was asking about whether it might be possible to manage the car parking such that the parking that was closer to the rear of residential properties might be used only during school working hours rather than at weekends and things. And I don't know whether that's something that you're able to give any thoughts on or any assurance around at the moment.
I'm afraid I'm not. I would be. I mean, it seems a reasonable request, and what we're very keen to do is to be able to work with the community. We have done in the past. We continue to want to. And if there has been any concerns about anything what's been happening in the site, then we've always contacted the resident. We've always tried to work to a mutually satisfactory conclusion, and we would certainly look to do that in the future.
So I think if that is something, if this was to be approved, if that's something that could be taken back and looked at, I think that would be a positive. The other question, which I'm not sure whether it's a question for yourself to answer or whether it's a question for Alison to answer. You mentioned about the school being chronically oversubscribed, and page 12 of the report, paragraph 1.2 says officers understand the school is oversubscribed. What I just wanted to understand was, is it oversubscribed from within catchment, or is it oversubscribed from applications to the school? Because I'm, you know, full disclosure, I'm a parent of a year 6 child who's transitioning at the moment to year 7. I'm aware of a number of children at the school where my child is at who have sought to get into Fulford, but they're not within the catchment area, or have quite recently moved into the catchment area. And I know that that's what happens in different schools, and obviously Fulford being an outstanding school with a very strong reputation in the city. But what I'm also conscious of is York had a bulge in pupils, which I think are currently year 9, I think is the big year at the moment, or possibly year 10 now. I understand the numbers are dropping off again. And it's just trying to understand what the pressures are for Fulford specifically that are different than the pressures on different schools in the city. Because obviously all parents want their children to go to the popular schools, the outstanding schools. That's different than not being able to provide places for the children within your own catchment area.
We are chronically oversubscribed, and we don't take any children who are not in catchment on transition to year 6. So we are oversubscribed regularly by 30, 40 children of in catchment children.
And has that been the case year on year for an amount of time? Or because, like I say, there's this bulge in pupils, isn't there, at the moment?
It's a case this year, it was a case last year and the year before, and it's,
right.
It's projected to get worse. And Alison might be able to give you some more information on that, but the projections from CYC are that we'll need to have 300 spaces.
Alison, if you could expand on that, that would be helpful. Thank you for your answer, because that doesn't quite tally with what I understand. I know the different parts of the city are doing slightly different things in terms of numbers, but it would just be helpful to understand what's happening in this side of the city.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. So it's like Steve said, forecasts are showing that the deficit places are going to continue at school. It is peaks and troughs, but ultimately they do need the places, especially. That's we've projected for the next 6 years. And there's a number of there's potential housing developments as well that are going to impact on Fulford. So yeah, we do see deficit places at Fulford being a problem in the future without doing this expansion. Although we anticipate that we wouldn't expand beyond the published admission number of 300, which we're trying to get to at the moment. We anticipate that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't need to do anything further, and we wouldn't expand any further at Fulford once this work was done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then I think I had Councillor Craghill.
Thank you. Yes, I think I had quite a few questions, but I think quite a number of them maybe better for Alan Simpson, the next speaker. But I'll try you with the first one, and this sort of follow up to that one. I am going back to the loss of the mature and semi-mature trees along the access route. And the question that kind of jumps out in that respect, you also referred to sort of how tight the space is on the site, and that's one of the challenges, but could the tennis courts not be relocated to somewhere else on the site, which would enable you, at least for that part of the access road that's near the trees, to have a lot more space, a lot more room for manoeuvre, possibly even a turning area that could take traffic back out the same way even?
I think everything's possible. I think what we all understand is we work in an area of financial deficit. We don't have money to be able to rip up tennis courts and replace tennis courts. And we don't have the place to be able to put them either, because we have to have certain amounts of green space for Sports England, and we have no capacity to be able to put anything on the school sites, on the school playing fields. We are at our minimum amount that we should have for the number of children.
Okay, for this playing fields. So I suppose my follow-up to that is, in the paper, in the submission from the parish council, they suggest that they have offered you the option of moving the tennis courts onto the new green space, which is adjacent to the access road. Is that something you've considered? Our tennis courts are for community use, so there's access into the school for community use. In terms of safeguarding, in terms of having children within a secure environment, to take them outside of the school site to go onto the parish field is not efficient in terms of education and the amount of time we have to be able to teach the children and their entitlement to teaching, and also it brings safeguarding issues because we don't have any control who can get into the tennis courts and around the parish fields, where we do within our secure sites of Fulford. Okay, I understand the safeguarding and I understand the challenges of having to take children down the road, which I think you used to have to do some time ago. But it is right next door, isn't it? It is immediately adjacent.
It's right next door, it is. And in terms of safeguarding, I am unwilling to take chances with children's lives just for the sake of popping out into an unsecure site. That would be my responsibility. I think that's something I would not be comfortable to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then I think we had Councillor Webb and then Councillor Fisher, but I would like to move on if possible after that.
Thank you. Sorry, it's me again. One of the people who spoke earlier talked about consultation, and we've had put in front of us a copy of the questionnaire that was sent out, I assume by yourself. And for quite a large change, this is a relatively brief questionnaire, but I wondered if you could just outline sort of who did this questionnaire go to, because obviously an earlier speaker mentioned that it had overwhelmingly gone to the school community. Did this go out, I don't know, as part of a parent newsletter or something like that? In terms of the local area, who did it go to, and what was the sort of percentage return, and you know, what did you learn from this questionnaire about the community's views around the access issues and everything we've talked about, really?
The consultation went out to all stakeholders. It went via York City website. It went to all secondary schools, all primary schools. It was on our website. Out of courtesy, it was mail dropped into the local residents who understood had a particular interest. But that wasn't the consultation. So in terms, it was an extra courtesy to make sure that they had that letter. What we found from it was that there was support, as the gentleman who spoke previously said, there was support for the expansion of the school. What we found out is that there is diametrically opposed opinions in terms of the access to and from the school. So from small amount of input which came from residents around Fulfordgate, it was about wanting all of the traffic to come through Germanybeck, and from the small amount of input we had about from some of the residents in Germanybeck, it was about it not going through Germanybeck.
Thank you, and yes, you can see the decision we're having to make here, but I suppose sort of following on from that, you might not know the answer to this, as this is possibly more a planning question, and I'm maybe just making note of it now, but In terms of further consultation beyond this document, are you aware of anything specific in terms of planning consultation? Or was it literally just this that you sent out?
So that was, as far as I'm aware, that was a pre-planning consultation and planning consultation, Ali.
I think I'm really answering on behalf of the school here, though. But this was an initial consultation, and then you followed it up with a further consultation, didn't you? That was on site a little bit further down the line. So this was the initial consultation, and then the school carried out a further consultation, which was restricted because of COVID, but was an opportunity to see the plans during the planning process.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you. And Councillor Fisher.
I'd just like to pick up on something that was said earlier, because clearly there's two problems here in terms of transport. One is the buses, and the other is the volume of cars entering and leaving the school for various reasons. And they therefore need to provide a significant amount more car parking space. Somebody suggested banning sixth formers from coming to school in cars, and I know that 53% of your students come on buses at present. What provision is there for sixth formers to use buses? Do you allow that one? Is that permitted or not?
Yes, sixth formers can use school buses.
Right. Would sixth formers be able to take a full life in the activity of the school, including all the extracurricular activities? Because buses obviously leave at a certain time, and I'm well aware as a teacher in a very, very similar school to Fulford in York, that there are enormous number of activities that go on after school, which sixth formers very much like to attend. Would it be possible to take a full life if they were not able to, if they had to use school buses?
What we find is that you can find different ways of getting home, because otherwise our extracurricular activities wouldn't happen. So children do find different ways of getting home, but obviously if they got the bus home, they wouldn't be able to partake in the extracurricular activity.
And the final thing is, I mean, we tried this at my former school to ban sixth formers to have very, very limited amount of car parking space. And all we found out was that the kids still came to school, but just parked them in neighbouring roads. Would you expect that to be a similar situation?
I would.
It actually caused more trouble than actually letting them park on the school campus. So I just want to explore whether that was an option, but you seem to be telling me it probably isn't.
I think it would be, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I can't see any further questions. So thank you for your time this evening. You've had a bit of a grilling there, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We could move on then to Alan Simpson, who's the architect, I believe, who's dialing in. If you can hear me, Mr. Simpson.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you okay. Yeah, you should have heard that you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you could hang on the line when you finish speaking, just in case there's any questions. But if you'd like to make your start in your own time.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Alan Simpson from 10 Architect. Fulford School offers a complex site. It has a range of specific challenges that we've looked to address as part of the design. We have tried to ensure that we've provided a holistic approach to the design, essentially to improve teaching and learning for students and for the teachers themselves. It's worth noting that as well as the new build, we've also developed a wider strategy across the site to improve student circulation within the site, to remove and refurbish buildings that are end of their life, to reduce the carbon footprint of the school, and also to expand in a careful and considerate way. And we've definitely had the needs of residents and local community at the heart of what we've tried to do, although I do understand that certain aspects of it have been challenging in terms of the consultations we've received. The new build, as I've said, is part of a wider school strategy based on circulation and student movement, and it focuses primarily on the two blocks of Hawking and Bronte as being discussed already. Through a combination of demolition and alteration to the existing buildings, we've looked to create safe routes through the school, improve safeguarding, improve movement, and connect the new buildings in a logical and carefully considered way. The new build is partially located on existing temporary accommodation, and there has been some demolition as well in order to get rid of end-of-life buildings. and new build is placed on top of buildings which represent approximately 60% of the new footprint. This has been done to really minimise the impact of building on any green space, which is one of our #1 drivers. We've also been very careful to try to position the building to respect local neighbours, and we've positioned it such that the narrow gable that faces the residence is over 34 metres away from the face of the existing buildings. And also we've made sure that the gables that do face the existing residents are blank to ensure that we've avoided overlooking their gardens, because we do respect their privacy. The designs have been carefully considered with Sport England, and we do not affect the sports pitches and the wider landscape. And so that has made sure that we provide sport whilst at the same time improving student safeguarding. We've also looked to improve DDA access and access for people with other disabilities, and that has been undertaken both through the circulation patterns, but also through the inclusion of a lift on the Bronte building. So really, in summary, the designs do offer a positive series of additions to enhance the existing school. It isn't just the new build, it's also refurbishment, circulation and movement and arrival, and we have definitely done it with an aim to reduce or remove completely any detrimental impact that there may be on neighbours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just ask then if the committee have any questions at this point. Councillor Craighill and then Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Yes, just going back to the traffic, I'm afraid, I suppose implies quite a lot of aspects we have less concern about. On the impact of the additional parking, I suppose I'd like to understand a bit better why the level of additional parking that's proposed is needed. And in relation to that, I wonder if you have any figures about how much the travel plan that was introduced in 2014 has actually reduced the number of people arriving by car, because that is the purpose of a travel plan. So are your travel plans actually reducing the number arriving by car?
Okay, really, the second point first. I'm afraid I can't give you any specific numbers in terms of the impact of the adoption of past or recent travel plans. I'm afraid I don't have that information, so I don't know whether Mr. Lewis can advise on that or whether that's something which we'd need to look elsewhere. But so I'm afraid I can't specifically answer your question on that. In relation to the number of cars on site, I think as we've covered already, the number of cars is a balancing act between providing adequate space on site to reduce congestion on surrounding roads and limiting parking on site, which can have knock-on effects. And so what we do with all school applications is that we engage with highway specialists who look at the balancing act of the numbers of cars, cycle storage, buses, etc., with a view to create a difficult balance between cars on site and cars off site. And the number we've got on site is what we've been recommended as being the optimum balance to provide adequate space for the school's function and for the growth of the school, whilst also trying to do everything we can to minimise the impacts of local residents, which has been made so clear within the consultation.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I think it kind of highlights us a bit more for all of us to do with travel plans, really. My other question, I think it's my only other question, was on a slightly different topic, which is the BREEAM, the building standard. Obviously, excellent is welcome. Outstanding would be better, but excellent is welcome. Can I just ask you about the solar panels? So in the paper, it says they're going on the sports hall, which is fine. But will there also be solar panels on the new extension? And if not, why not?
I'm not sure 100% as to whether or not there are solar panels on the main build. But I'd need to just check with the electrical engineers on that. The BREEAM rating, as you probably know, is a holistic approach towards environmental assessment. and it includes a wide range of features, which include obviously the electrical side. And generally speaking, we would be locating the solar panels and the inverters at the point where they're close to where the main plant and incomers will be. So it's not always the case that you put solar panels on the build themselves, but the solar panels will contribute to the overall impact of the reduction in carbon that we're aiming for as part of the energy credits that we'd be looking at from the BREEAM ratings. I think even if there were no panels on there at the current time, as we look to transition to a lower carbon community, as we look to phase out gas and we look to move towards things like air source heat pumps, I can imagine that there would be an increase in the number of solar panels in the future. So I think that's just something which we would probably be looking at as right across the school estate in the future, irrespective of where it's located now. But generally speaking, we would be looking to locate the inverters close to where the electrical incomers are.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking about the potential reduction on your energy bills, which I assume are huge. Yeah.
Yes, we would just in terms of the reduction on energy bills, we would look to maximise the revenue savings generated by solar energy, and it's a balancing act between what we can afford from a capital side and what we can reap from a revenue side. I think has been highlighted already. The budget is being spread thinly across a number of areas, and we obviously looking to take a holistic approach.
Yeah, if we could move on there. Councillor Ferret.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask that you just talk us through the constraints around access to the site, as one of the speakers did mention condition 27 and how the southern access point is restricted to the use of school buses, cyclists and pedestrians, and said that it didn't seem fair for Fulfordgate to get all of the car access that way. So can you just talk us through why the decisions had to be made to set it up in that way, please?
The parking and highways elements of it, to some degree, are outside some of the architectural aspects that we've been dealing with, and they've been picked up really by the highways consultants, engineers and the schools. I'm not sure that I can add anything positive to what's already been said in relation to the constraints that we've been working to. I know that we've looked to improve the organisation within the school site, but I'm not really able to comment particularly on the highways and access provisions directly. So I'm afraid I'm not sure that I can add anything to what's already been said.
Okay. Thank you. I can't see any further questions there, so I'd similarly thank you for your time this evening. Yeah, you'll be able to leave the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can move on then to Councillor Mary Ermston, who's from Fulford Parish Council.
Thank you very much. Just to say firstly that the Parish Council does appreciate that Fulford is an outstanding school and that we would have wished to support this expansion plan. However, we have serious concerns about this application. We were dismayed to learn that at least 20 trees will be felled, including all 10 trees along the western boundary next to the open space. 3.6 of your report states that these 10 trees are highly visible within views and that their loss would result in significant harm to public amenity. It's hard to understand why the loss of so many valuable trees is even being contemplated. It may be that the site is actually too small to accommodate this further expansion, or it could be that there's simply too many new car parking spaces. We've questioned why the number of parking spaces is set to increase, despite the site being in a very sustainable and accessible location. This runs completely counter to the Council's objectives to address the effects of climate change and to reduce the number of car trips in the city. So the result of all this new parking is that the turning circle and some of the hard standing areas previously used by the buses is no longer available. So as a result, the southern access road is now to be reserved for a double row of buses to park up and wait in a queue twice a day before leaving. But this access road was never intended to be a parking area or a road just for buses. It was to provide general access for staff and students and also for visitors to the nearby sports hall. This was always the intention, and I remember at the inquiry, it was one of the main public benefits that traffic would reduce on Main Street and Heslington Lane because of the new purpose-built access through from the south. So the long-suffering residents of Fulfordgate were assured that the new access point would ease their traffic problems and take much of the traffic through Germanybeck. But sadly, this application does nothing to address this problem, or very little. And also to the north boundary, 43 new parking spaces are to be built right up to garden hedges and underneath tree canopies. This will affect the amenity of those residents
30 seconds, right.
And will pose a threat to even more trees, as confirmed by the landscape architect in her extensive report. So it may be the case that the school needs additional classroom capacity, but this educational need shouldn't override national and local policy which aim to safeguard the environment and protect amenity. These expansion plans could perhaps be made more acceptable, but as they stand, they need to be reconsidered so that a better solution can be found to deal with the access issues and the tree loss. Yes, I'd be happy to go into the history of why the tennis court, when the tennis courts were actually put where they are now,
Okay,
they were
thank
removed.
you. Sorry.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah, I'll just ask if the committee have got any questions. Councillor Crawford.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming and speaking to us, Councillor Ernston. I won't ask you about the tennis courts, but I'm sure somebody will. I just wanted to pick up, because you made reference to it in your speech, and again, it's there in the comments that were put in by the Parish Council about these assurances that were given. And you'll have heard me asking what we have as a record from the planning authority. I think there's probably quite a number of us around the table that weren't councillors at the time when the Germanybeck application came through initially. So who gave you what assurances? And you mentioned, I think, the 2006 inquiry that assurances were given there. If you can expand on it, on any of that, so that we can understand what the community understands to have been the case, that would be really helpful.
Well, it goes back to the inquiry, the public inquiry, where this the evidence of the council was that this road would be provided and it will be a public benefit for access to come from Germanybeck with a purpose-built road, and it would take traffic away from Heslington Lane and from Main Street, which, as you know, are very congested. And when the school expanded, the application from 2014, they built additional classrooms where the tennis courts were previously. So those tennis courts, sorry, I shouldn't have gone on to tennis courts, should I? But during that application, the school did make assurances in writing that, well, it's in our letter. I can read out the little bit that says, so we've amended the plans to create an access route suitable for cars and buses from the Germanybeck site, if and when the Germanybeck development is constructed. A new turning circle is unnecessary as there is an existing turning circle located on the school site. And then it goes on to say that the increase in car traffic due to the expansion at that time, these issues would be resolved when the Germanybeck entrance becomes operational. And then it goes on to say it's highly likely that vehicle access will be via Germanybeck by this time. Therefore, the increase in 2014 of the sixth form numbers will not impact on Fulfordgate and Eastwood Avenue. And then it says the sports hall traffic from the initial build would also enter via Germanybeck once this is constructed. So there have been a lot of promises.
So if I may, just for complete.
Yeah, I think we want to try and keep this brief because we sort of separate a little bit the application we have before us from what a slightly, a better application might look like. So if we could try and keep this kind of alternative.
I'm not trying to look at what a better application might look like. What I just want to just get a clear understanding of is what assurances have been given when and by whom. So what I think I've understood from what you're saying, Councillor Emerson, is that the local authority gave an assurance during 2006 in the inquiry that access to the site would be improved by the Germanybeck development. And then the school gave assurances in 2014 at the time of its expansion then, that those same improvements would be in place by the time that the expansion had gone ahead. Is that a fair summary of the situation?
Well, it was more an understanding. Everybody understood that that was going to happen. I don't think, as Gareth says, there's no legal agreement that says, you know, or what traffic has to use that road. But it was just an understanding. Everybody accepted it. Peter Evely, at the time, in his evidence, I think he refers to the benefit of this access road, and it was a condition on the outline that the access road should go up to the school boundary for future use.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Can't see any further questions at that point. So
thank you very much.
Thank you. If we can move on then to Councillor Keith Aston. You can hear us, Councillor Aston.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you fine. And you'll know well that you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and if you could just hang on the line when you've spoken, just in case there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to place on record that Fulford School is one of the city's many outstanding education facilities with a long-standing tradition of excellence, and it is justifiably popular with parents and pupils. Throughout my time as local councillor, traffic and access around the school has been a long-standing issue. The potential of an access route through the school, as you've just heard, to Germanybeck was something that was proposed by the planning inspector when the outline plans were approved by the Secretary of State back in 2007. This was welcomed with the goal of easing traffic pressures in the local area, but unfortunately did not include at the time space within the development or a budget to actually make it happen. And many of us have been raising this point for many years in order to bring forward a solution. It's clear that there are competing needs from stakeholders, but residents are right to be disappointed by the planning processes. The residents of Fulfordgate and Eastwood Avenue will see some relief from the current situation due to the proposed one-way route. However, understandably, concerns over the impact remain. I was also concerned to learn earlier last year that the new Germanybeck residents were not made aware of the plans for school access prior to purchase of their properties. I've discussed the possibility of implementing timed parking restrictions if necessary on Porter Avenue, as some residents there will need on-road parking. There must be further consideration on how to ease the traffic pressure. This could include residents-only parking, as well as work by the school on travel planning and discouraging staff and pupils from using private cars. There's also a need for a robust construction management plan, ensuring that all residents adjacent to the school are not further inconvenienced. I would like to express my support for residents and Fulford Parish Council's request for the following considerations or conditions. That any part of the playing field used for construction traffic or storage should be restored to its original condition, producing an annual travel plan to ensure the impact of these changes is monitored and any further issues addressed, and with condition 27, consideration of allowing buses, staff access and construction traffic at particular times. Whilst the work and expansion of this outstanding school is clearly a positive step for children and families, it's imperative that the views of local residents are thoroughly taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if there are any questions. See Councillor Webb, I think that is hand up first. And Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Councillor Aston. A question, just to be clear, because I believe, you didn't really declare this of interest, but you are a Fulford Parish Councillor yourself, aren't you? I believe you're Vice Chair. And I was just wondering, do you agree with the position that Fulford Parish Council has taken in opposition to this application?
So you're correct. I am a Fulford Parish Councillor as well. My view was very much summarised by that final comment, which is that the work and expansion of the school is a positive step forward for many children and families. But I do believe that more consideration and more conditions are needed, and I hope you'll consider that when you start debating that later in the meeting.
Thank you. And second question, as councillor for the local area, could I just ask sort of what, there's been a concern about a lack of consultation raised, and I just wonder what part have you played in consultation, and how have you sort of facilitated that to help it happen?
So I've had really quite comprehensive involvement since way before 2007, and I won't take you through every step because I don't think the chair will allow it. But for example, through the planning inquiry, when this scheme went to the planning committee in 2014, and at every opportunity, myself, residents and the parish council have been making the point that we need a solution and that we need space, because we knew that this traffic and access problem was going to come forward. And I was disappointed, particularly at 2014, at the planning decision that took away a bit of that space that might have given us more flexibility. Similarly, I've worked with residents to look at the potential solutions and to try and encourage all the stakeholders to work together, which has been comprehensive. But obviously, we've now got to the point that we've got the application in front of us, and I think I and residents have learned an awful lot about planning processes since 2007.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and good evening, Councillor Aston. Sort of on a similar line to Councillor Webb, really. I just want to understand, because obviously you've been the ward councillor there for a very long time now, and this has obviously been a very long-standing issue, which is now coming to a head, and we as a committee are going to have to jump one way or the other, I suppose. What work has been done to try to alleviate the known traffic concerns to date? What things have you as the ward councillor done in terms of exploring, looking at Res Park, looking at the school's traffic management plan and trying to work with the community?
I'm going to stop this here because we're not here to sort of investigate the past sort of 10 years.
Well, we need to, because the problem is that we're being asked to take into account.
This Councillor Crawshaw, that we need to determine. We're already 2 hours in. I would like to move on, please.
Well, what I would just like to understand from Councillor Aston, then, if I may, because we all have to take a decision here tonight, and Councillor Aston, as the ward councillor, hasn't, I don't think, committed one side or the other on this, and it would be very helpful if he could give us a steer as to what the community view would be, because we ultimately will have to say yay or nay, or defer potentially. So Councillor Aston, if you could perhaps give us a clear steer as to where you think the community would like to see this go in terms of the known traffic impacts that approving this are likely to deliver, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
If you could be very brief, please, because we really need to move on.
I can't give a brief answer to the question, but I will try. It's unfortunate that residents weren't listened to back in 2014, as we would have been in a very different place. But when I summarised, I would like the committee to look very much closely at those conditions, and I'm happy to repeat those now if you'd like, which is that any part of the playing field used for construction, traffic or storage should be restored to its original condition, that producing an annual travel plan to ensure the impact of these changes is monitored and any further issues addressed, and condition 27, consideration of allowing buses, staff access and construction traffic at particular times. But I do support all of the points that have been put forward by local residents about their expectations, about trees and about places near to where they live. And obviously there's a lot for the committee to discuss in working through that.
Okay. Thank you. I can't see any further questions at that point. So thank you for your time this evening, Councillor Aston. And you'll be able to leave the meeting now, but you'll be able to continue watching on the YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we now take a 5-minute break, we're coming back for questions to officers. Just pause there. further questions to officers at this point? Councillor Webb?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's a question of clarification, really, in terms of the sort of the traffic counting. It was mentioned that this was done during, you know, the pandemic, when obviously there's a lot less traffic moving around. Could you sort of comment on what's been done around that? Yeah, and that'd be very helpful. Thanks.
And the figures that we have that the school provided were all from surveys that were previous, you know, before COVID. So the data we've got is as we expect if things go back to normal, whatever that is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Can't see any, so if we're happy then to move into debate. Who would like to start us off? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Just this might be a question for officers, or this might be something to consider for debate. I'm not sure. A resident mentioned that conditioning lighting being turned off at night. I was wondering if that is something that straight away we could add, particularly that the is it Eastwood boundary. Something straightforward to start with.
There is a proposed condition, number 12, that submits details of the external lighting design. That's for ecology, and so we can protect visual amenity, character of the area, and residential amenity as well. It's condition 12, proposed condition.
It's a small question for me as well, actually. So condition 27 precludes access of the vehicles other than buses from the south. It sounds from earlier that highways might consider that might be useful for more vehicles to come from the south, which would make logical sense. You know, if you've got cars coming from the south, generally, why make them go up and round? I guess I don't think there's probably enough information to in a sense change that condition to make it so there can be vehicles from the south. But is there a way of making it so that is something that they would have to consider, and potentially, because presumably to change this condition at the moment they'd have to come back with another application. Could this condition be changed to sort of preclude those additional vehicles until an assessment was carried out that looked into the possibilities of having more vehicles from the south? Or?
You could word a condition. You could word a condition to do that. I'd suggest delegating, if that was going to be the decision, delegating that to officers in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair, because I certainly couldn't think of that off the top of my head. It needs some thought. I don't know if Helen has any comments in terms of practicalities.
Well, based on the information provided to us by the school, the buses would be stacking in 2 rows on that bit of access next to the tennis courts. So really, if the buses are accessing, and in the morning, my understanding is they wouldn't fully stack, they would stack for a bit and go as soon as they're empty. You can't have a traffic flow the other way because those 2 lanes are taken up. And then obviously on an evening, the same happens, but this time they're stacking, waiting for all the children or all the students to get on the buses and then going as a convoy. So allowing 2-way might be quite difficult. It would have to be very carefully managed to ensure that there's no conflict between a bus coming one way and the car trying to get in, as students are also getting on and off. So
the teachers are coming generally before the buses and leaving after.
I find it quite difficult to manage, because if that car was to arrive too late, then they have to turn around exactly at the point where you have children coming into school on walking and cycling. We did consider the flow the other way, but the issue obviously for the school is to have control over who comes on the site, and obviously from the north, that's where reception is. So obviously I'm putting words in the mouth of the head teacher there, but I understand their concern is to keep the flow where they have control of it.
That's the word.
On that same point, could I just clarify around 27? Obviously, it says southern access point with Porter Avenue hereby approved shall be restricted to use of school buses, cyclists, and pedestrians. So does that mean then that if I'm, a delivery van delivering something to the school, I go in through Fulfordgate and then have to turn around and come out through Fulfordgate? So does that not then lead to the same problem, that if that delivery van, which, I'm thinking like bin collections, for example, would happen at probably around about school time, because it's that sort of time in the morning, could you have a situation where the buses are coming in and the bin wagon might end up going out of the centre, which would then lead to the problems that you just mentioned?
Yes, I understand that's the existing situation.
Yeah, but if we're looking at this planning application, I can't get my head around why it wouldn't make sense to have everything going from one end and coming out the other end, rather than what the condition here 27 says is the only things that can come out of the southern end are buses, cyclists, and pedestrians.
Because the gates would be shut apart from when the buses go out.
Okay,
is my understanding.
It's going to require some careful management, though, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have moved into debate. So if anybody is willing to make a proposal, Councillor Craighill.
Sorry, I just wanted to pursue that point slightly further. So if I'm understanding it correctly, any access or egress through the southern entrance, as it's called, southern entrance, would have to be controlled by the school anyway. It would be the gates, as you just said, I think, would be closed and would only be open so for deliveries or. So if we do put something in on that condition, it depends on it being controlled by the school, perhaps actively controlled anyway, doesn't it?
I think that's good.
The deliveries, construction, traffic, yeah, that sort of thing.
Can I ask that one again?
I'm not sure what we were waiting for.
Because I'm slightly confused myself. That's all.
All right, I was just trying to push forward, just pushing that point a bit further. If we want to make a change to condition 27, anything that would come in through the southern entrance or go out through the southern entrance would depend on being controlled by the school, would it not? And presumably we would be altering the condition to make it possible, not making it necessarily a requirement.
Yes, the school has control of its own estate. I guess from condition, all we can do is we can condition. It's reasonable to condition how vehicles and legal access. I don't think we can require. We can say they can't do one thing. But I don't think we can tell them to do one thing unless we've got the evidence to say that that's be harmful to do the other thing. I think it is a practicalities issue, and I'm looking for help now in terms of because of the way it's modelled in terms of vehicles leaving the site and how they stack up, that everything would have to wait until the buses had gone. Okay.
But sorry, the buses will not stay there in the middle of the day, will they?
No.
They will drop off and they will go away and then they will come back to pick up, surely.
But when the buses are not there, the gates are shut.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Staff could organise to let in a delivery vehicle or a construction vehicle or whatever at that point.
Well, I think that in terms of the construction period, obviously we'll have to see with the construction management plan, it might be possible to manage, obviously, with, during construction, you've got a lot more staff on site and it might be possible to manage safely. But during a normal day, if a delivery was to come at the gate and then have to wait for a caretaker or somebody to open the gate, I'm guessing that's not what the school has considered. That's not what the school has presented to us. Really, they've presented the other situation, and that's what we've assessed. So we've not, the design of the access is all designed in that way. So we don't, I'm not confident that it would be safe to do it the other way because it's not been designed to do it the other way. That's why I've requested this condition, because I don't want the school to try doing it the other way when it's not been designed for it at all.
I don't think we'd have the information to ask for it to be done the other way, but we could ask for that to be looked at and then determine whether or not it would be possible. I suppose is the route, perhaps. There's a way of doing that. Perhaps just delegating to chair, vice chair, and thinking about it later. Councillor Webb.
I think I'd agree with that, Chair, but one thing I would say is from experience at school sites, automatic gates do exist, and I think it's a pretty reasonable for delivery drivers or whoever to wait in a particular place, and actually that does add a further sense of control to your school site, and it can be controlled by someone in the office. I'm not trying to make any more work for anyone, but that will be something to explore, I think.
Thank you. We've probably gone about as far as we can with that at the moment, but yeah, we'll carry on looking for somebody to make a proposal, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that bothers me about this site is the whole business of traffic and access egress, because as I see it, we're in a no-win situation. We seem to have people in Fulfordgate who expect that all the traffic will go in through Germanybeck, and we have people in Germanybeck who are saying, well, we never told there's going to be access and don't want that, traffic to go through their area. I rather wish actually this application had been split into two parts, because I have very little problems whatsoever with the overall development of the school buildings and the aim to expand. I think they're reasonably well thought out. I don't think there's a problem there. But I am concerned about the loss of trees on the access, and I bitterly regret that. And I would like to see a stronger condition on page 43 as far as landscaping should we be mindful to approve. Looking at the way the traffic flows, I think a north-south access egress is significantly better, because I think the access from the south, egress from the south is significantly better than the egress onto Heslington Lane. So I think that is the preferred way if we were mindful to go down the lines of going for a one-way system. I do feel though that this needs the whole traffic system needs to be reviewed on a very regular basis. I mean, there is a travel plan in place. I think we need to say, if we can condition it, that after 2 years or a year, that we should look at the actual traffic figures and see how this is actually proceeding, because I'm reluctant to commit myself at the moment to this in perpetuity. I think it will need a review, because there are clearly some issues with loss of trees and the safety of the highways. There is one other issue I would bring up which hasn't been thought about. If we have a permanent access from the south, which is always available, which is safeguarding of kids, because one thing you know as far as a teacher is concerned is you always have to think about how safe your kids are, and the more access and egress points there are onto a school that are uncontrolled, the more access there is for people to get on and abuse kids and cause trouble. So I think that needs to be thought of. So if we are going to have the southern access, I think it does need, if it's going to be just for buses, I think it needs to be controlled, and there need to be gates in place that can be locked and secured, possibly remotely, to make sure that people can't get on off the site without control.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Gareth, it was just whether there is a way of conditioning.
Yes, there must be a way of conditioning. Looking at rewording the condition to give some elements of flexibility to look at it again without having to make another planning application. And the travel plan, there could be an insert into the travel plan to review how the access road is working. Did you say a year or just say 2 years? Or?
I think probably 2 years, because you probably need to spend the first year gathering data and analysing it before you come back to committee with an application to vary the conditions if you need to do so. So I would say probably 2 years, and then at the end of that 2 year period to be fully reviewed.
Yeah. You mentioned condition 19. At the moment, the condition requires a detailed landscaping scheme, including the replacement of trees. Not really sure.
First of all, I was delighted to see that the nagging by Councillor Waters and myself has finally seems to have paid fruit. In fact, there's no time restriction of 5 years on this, and it appears to be that they are to be replaced in perpetuity. Is that correct?
Yes, it's horses for courses, and in certain circumstances we feel it's relevant and others without.
Good. Could I also just amend it to the fact that any trees or plants shall replace next planting season with others of a similar size and species? Can we be very clear that obviously some of these trees are mature trees, and we can't obviously replace them with mature trees, but could I suggest that the trees which are, the plants which are, trees which are planted on the site are of a substantial size? We don't want small saplings, you know, sort of 3 feet high, because on a school site they'll just get broken off. You know, it's inevitable kicking footballs about. The trees that are replacing the trees that are removed should be of a substantial size. I did some work today, and you know, sort of 12, 15 feet tall trees can be transplanted quite easily. And I think we want decent sized trees which are going to be robust enough to survive the problems of living on a school site.
Yes,
that was a
yes,
statement. Okay. Can we consider that a proposal then?
I will propose approval with those amended conditions and the other amended conditions shown.
Okay, thank you. Is anybody willing to second that? Councillor Dolby? Any further debate at this point, or any other issues you want to raise? Councillor Crawshaw?
Thanks, Chair. I think we've all looked at this and thought that this is a really difficult situation, isn't it? Because what we've got is a school that wants to expand, and as I think Councillor Urmston said, you know, we might need to accept that actually the site is not really of sufficiently large size to warrant a school of the size that is being created. And all of the additional pupils and additional staff will have a significant impact, as they are already having, on the wider community. And I think that unfortunately this particular application is a symptom of things that are completely out of our control within a planning authority and a planning committee. which is the pressure that schools are under in terms of the number of pupils that they need to take in, because you receive funding per pupil and schools are not funded properly, which means that there's a pressure on them to take in as many pupils as they can. And if we are not going to have development in the city that is of sufficient size to deliver new secondary schools, which was proposed on this side of the city at the Langwith development, but now that development's been reduced in size, it's not big enough to support a new secondary school there. And so what that does is creates pressure on the existing secondary schools that we have in the city to develop effectively. And that's what we're seeing here. So I think we're all deeply uncomfortable with what's being put before us, because I think we can all see that no criticism whatsoever of the school itself. The school is doing what it can do to support the local community, but is being put under incredible pressure, and then is having a detrimental impact on different parts of the community by virtue of the impact on travel and traffic in the area. I think we are where we are with this one. We have to take it at face value in where it is. But I think that we as a city do need to think very carefully about how we plan the developments in our city, such that piecemeal developments, whether they're 200, 300, 400 size developments in already difficult and compact areas, have all kinds of knock-ons. And until we start looking at some proper sustainable size developments around the edges of our city that deliver all of the benefits of a new development, not just to the new residents, but to the existing residents in the city as well, we're going to keep coming up against these sort of problems.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts then, Councillor Craighill?
Thank you. Yes, just a few comments, and then I just wanted to come back to a specific condition at the end. Yeah, I mean, following on from those comments from Councillor Crawshaw, aside from the issues he's highlighted in practical terms, I don't have any issue with the need for the expansion, and I don't really have any problem with the idea that the school needs new buildings and better buildings. I'm very aware that schools such as Fulford have a lot of challenges apart from the need to expand, but generally with the maintenance of older buildings and the need for better teaching spaces. So I sympathise with a lot of that. I know that some of the residents on Eastwood Avenue have some concerns about the height of the extension, but I think on balance, the distances probably do make it acceptable, and that wouldn't be, for me, probably on balance a reason to refuse this. The sustainability of the buildings is acceptable, although I would prefer to see it as BREEAM outstanding, and I would urge them to put PV on as many spaces as they can going forwards to just help with their energy bills. But having said all that, I am still very concerned about the loss of the trees. And I'm not entirely convinced that there isn't an option to do it differently, to explore further the option for the open space, the parish field, the offer that's being made. I understand there are safeguarding issues and etc. But, you know, it is completely adjacent and would seem to me to be something that could have been explored further. And I'm not convinced about the need for the additional parking and whether the travel plans could actually, if implemented, could actually help to address that, and therefore perhaps also keep the existing turning area as an option, I suppose. So I think for that reason, for the reason about the trees, I think, you know, sometimes we absolutely have to compromise and say on the balance of benefits, you know, that tree, we'll have to agree that it should go, or those trees there. But I think we have to come to a point where we stop doing this with mature and semi-mature trees. These are the ones that absorb most carbon emissions, and they also have a huge benefit in terms of health and visual amenity and well-being. So I think for those reasons, I am finding it difficult to actually support the application overall. I'll decide finally when we vote. So having said all that, I'd just like to come back to condition 12 about the lighting, because I'm not sure really, did you say you would add something into that to specifically make it refer to turning the lighting off in the evenings? Because at the moment it's really focused on ecology and not on that particular parking near Eastwood Avenue.
We didn't say that, but there's no reason why, if members feel that's a necessary requirements, as obviously all conditions have to be, that couldn't be added if you felt that was needed.
I'll just go back to Councillor Fisher then. Councillor Daubney, is that? Councillor Craghill.
Sorry, I was going to say, I agree to some extent with what Councillor Crawshaw is saying. We do need further educational provision, especially in the east of the city, where there's going to be pressure from new developments. It's easy to be, to have 2020 hindsight, but I'm beginning to think that the closure of Burnholme School in 2014 was probably a short-term decision which has had long-term effects, which could have mitigated some of the problems we now face at Fulford, Huntington, Archbishop Aldgate, and the other very successful schools to the east of York. And unfortunately, none of us were on the council at that time.
Sorry, Councillor Fisher, I meant specifically on the point Councillor Craghill made about the lighting and the condition, whether you were happy for that to be, I assume so.
I didn't understand what you're asking. Yes, I think those conditions are perfectly reasonable.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galvin, go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. It was always going to be difficult on this, and often in planning committee, we often try to pass a camel through the eye of a needle, which of course we all know couldn't even do it in the Old Testament. There are going to be winners and losers on this, just like the cup match last night and the cup final on Sunday. We cannot, I don't think, satisfy everybody's thoughts and opinions on this matter. I think somewhere in the report it talks about being a planning balance, and I'm afraid that's the balance that we have to look at. Is the improvement to the school, given that we have in front of us, given the, I use the word constraints on budgets, a necessary requirement for the city? Or should we turn it down completely and support the residents who are concerned about trees and traffic moving backwards and forwards? Personally, I think the biggest issue is this whole issue of traffic. But having looked at that, I think perhaps that can be solved. You're not going to please everybody. You're not going to please people on both sides of the school, the north entrance, the south entrance. That is going to be an impossible task, in all honesty. But at least I think, as one of the speakers said, it might be better, or a better deal, to try and ease it out so that each entrance or each road, street, call it what you will, gets their fair share of traffic. We come to the trees. Yeah, I do regret the loss of trees of that size, but it comes back to the needs of the school. If that car parking is not extended, then one of two things will happen. Fulford will then get blocked up with cars parked everywhere, which, if that's what people want, then so be it. Or alternatively, it's going to be covered in double yellow lines. I mean, we're seeing that, I think, up on Badger Hill. So I'm going to move, Chair, that given the various suggestions to amend the conditions, which I must confess I haven't heard them all, because trying to hear muffled conversation through the microphones, through the speaker, is not easy. It's either my hearing is not as good as it used to be, or people not speaking as loud as perhaps I would like. I'm going to move, Chair, that given the changes to the amendments that have been kicked about, that the application be approved, as I say, subject to the variations that people are looking for in the conditions.
Thank you. I think we have had it moved and seconded by Councillor Fisher and.
I'm sorry. Well, that's the problem with the mascot. I mean, I thought we were kicking it about like a football. You know, from me to you and from me, you know, the Chuckle Brothers, from me to you and you to me. And I think we have to make a decision, whether we like it or not, one way or t'other. We have to make a decision on this application.
Hopefully, I think we're ready now to move to the vote. Councillor Webber, is this very specifically?
Yeah, it is very specific. It is on the off-site parking that I mentioned, I don't know, about 2 hours ago. And it was how we would identify a suitable traffic management plan that would look at that. And I know we've mentioned about an annual every 2 years, wasn't it? And I wondered if there was a way to build that in. Is that possible? Because I think, for me, I think that's part, and you know, I agree with Councillor Galvin, and I knew he'd bring in the Old Testament, but I thought that that's something that might be quite useful to think about. Is because for me that does make a big difference, really. This traffic management plan.
I think in terms of if that's looking at residents parking or wider spread controls in surrounding streets because of problems that may occur in the future, I think the development is not substantial enough to warrant that. You know, what we did in Badger Hill, for example, is on the basis of the whole development of a whole new university campus. So that would be that's my comment.
So I'm looking for a commitment that it would be investigated.
Well, we
Maybe
can
possible to put surveys in the travel plan to check. I mean, it's very, very difficult to count because we've had this experience at the university where they do beat surveys where they're, you know, for a week, people go around and ask people, where are you going? You've parked your car, where are you going? And actually people refuse, they don't want to answer the question, especially, I guess, the people actually going to uni. So the data is not great, but it is possible to do. But I think what Gareth was saying is any measures to then address this would be disproportionate compared to the size of the development. So,
because it's that to have any weight, there needs to be a requirement that if a problem is found, then that's paid for by, I guess, by the school, it doesn't seem to be the size of development that would ordinarily warrant that. I mean, it's not like, I don't know what we had recently.
No, I can understand. We're talking, you know, about we're talking about a school that is like all schools, strapped for cash due to government pressures. We're not talking about a developer who's actually making millions on the side. So.
No, we can't identify anything. For example, if there's a need to turn a bus at a certain junction, and they then have to pay for that double yellow line to keep that junction clear. This is one step beyond.
Okay. Well, we have a proposal which has been seconded. I think we've reached the point where we can move to the vote. Angela, if you could perform the vote and a named vote after Gareth gives us a very good rundown.
So it's been moved to approve the application as recommended. The recommended reworded conditions in the update. There is an amendment to condition 27, which is to be delegated to officers in consultation with the chair and vice chair, and to rewording condition 27 to look at alternatives to the current proposal regarding traffic flow. Condition 19 to be amended to specify trees of a substantial size in terms of the replacement of the trees on the western boundary, and also an amendment to the travel plan condition to look at how the access road is working, a 2-year review of that, and then condition 12, turn off the lighting on the northern boundary. I guess after last, I don't want to put the words into anybody's mouth here, but at what point? The end of the school day, the end of the, including evening community use.
I think what was mentioned before, was there another phrase somebody else used for the end to include, you know, when teachers have finished their day? Can't remember what the wording was. Councillor Webb.
I'd suggest 7 till 7. I don't know what people think about that, but because then after 7, if there was community use, I would expect that the car numbers would be so low that they could potentially go elsewhere on site. There's nothing, I suppose we couldn't decree that, could we? But we could say that that lighting was switched off after 7.
Yes, much better to use a specified time. Okay, I can see nods to that. So at that point then. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably good. Yeah, could you repeat that? So you're actually voting to delegate approval specific subject to everything I said before, but specifically in terms of the rewording of condition 27. Okay. Angela, if you're able to.
So members, if you could just indicate whether you're for, against, or abstaining when I call your name. Councillor Craghill.
Against.
Councillor Crawshaw.
For.
For.
Four. Four.
Was that me? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I didn't have a mic. Councillor Waldby.
Against.
Councillor Webb.
For.
For.
7 for, 2 against. So it's approved. Delegated approval, subject to commission.
7 for, 2 against is approved. Thank you. Move on then to the next item. The telecoms map. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Orrell is waiting to come in and join us for this next item. I'll just give members fair warning as well. We've got a guillotine at about 8 o'clock tonight. Normally we go on until we're done, but we will have to be out then.
Thank you very much. We can move on then. Gareth, if you can take us through next item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is an application for a new 15-metre high telecommunications map with cabinets at the base and associated ancillary work. It's prior approval application rather than a planning application. So members can only consider citing appearance of the development principle being granted permission by the general permitted development order. And it's a site on the approved lane. So the site plan on the screen. That's a drawing of the mast. And then the location, so the site is, that's on the left-hand side, it's the access into the Popperton Juniors football club. This is Milford Lane as it goes down towards the ring road. There has been a further letter of objection received, which is set out on the papers in front of you, the updates in front of you, under item 5. But in the planning balance, we consider that the additional representation has been assessed at the planning balance and the recommendation is unchanged from the published report.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered, Gareth, if you could just explain to the committee, because I think this is the first time I've seen one of these applications while I've been on the committee. So we can consider the siting and the appearance. So the siting is fairly obvious, it's where it is. In terms of appearance, is there any definition as to what, are we just looking at colour, or, because obviously I think the contention here is height, but arguably is that appearance? I don't know. If you could just give us an explanation, that would be helpful.
I think the height can be considered to be a material to the judgment of appearance. You'll have read in the report that the officers gone back to them when we as originally submitted, it was 20 metre high mast, and we've secured the reduction down to 15 metres.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move on to our Councillor Webb.
Sorry, Chair, just one quick question. On the 1.3, it says the nearest residential property is number 82 Millfield Lane, and that's 40 metres away. It's not, I don't know the area particularly well. It's not densely populated. It doesn't look like there's any other houses around. I assume as it's rural west, there isn't.
The southern edge of the village. So if you look on page 71, the houses to the north, to the northwest. That's effectively the start of the village, and then on the other side of the road, on the sports pavilion side of the road, there's a field, and then you're into the heart of the village proper.
Okay, we can move on then to our public speakers, the first of which is Eddie Jones. Thank you very much for your patience this evening.
Thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion. My name's Edie Jones. I'm a councillor for Nether Popperton Parish Council, and the point about this mast is that there's a certain amount of inconsistency in the planning department handling the application in respect of other installations and buildings and developments that have taken place in the last few years. All buildings in the development of York Business Park were controlled in height so that the views of the Minster were not compromised, as they represent part of the historic connections between the villages, Poppleton and the church. Secondly, when Poppleton Tigers were allowed to develop playing fields in the Greenbelt, the development of the clubhouse height was reduced so as not to have an imposing structure in the Greenbelt. There were sufficient funds for them to complete the 2 stories proposed, but they agreed that it compromised the openness of the Greenbelt. The highest wind turbine, the latest wind turbine that was developed at the soccer club was reduced in height to 13 meters and placed at the furthest corner of the development so that it didn't create something intrusive to the vista of the openness of the green belt. I cannot emphasize this enough. Pedestrian lights on the footpath were similarly reduced in height and in light so that not to create pollution in the green belt. Domestic buildings at the caravan park have been refused 4 times because it is in the extended development of the green belt. The top of the proposed telecommunication mast is 15 meters. I've just looked outside the window there. There's a telecommunications mast outside the window there, in amongst buildings. You don't notice it. In a green belt open space, that will stand out like a sore thumb. We have in the last 10, 15 years had the pavements dug up for the cabling in 2004. And then 2 years ago, the pavements were dug up again for cabling, for fiber optic cabling. And now this mast is part of a new generation to help to speed communications. The height of the mast is considered excessive, as the only thing that's visible in that hedgerow is 4 meters high, and it's a few trees. The mast is such in a prominent position that it's intrusive, being on the major road connecting from the village to the 1237 Manor School and the business premises. Furthermore, the neighbourhood plan was made in 2017 with a 91% approval of the village population. PMP1 says within the general extent of the green belt, inappropriate development will not be supported except in very special circumstance. This mast, in the opinion of the parish councils, does not merit very special circumstances. There are areas examined by the proposed development that would appear to be more appropriate, but possibly more expensive to develop. With this proposal adjacent to the major road, there are safety issues and they have not been addressed. I respectfully request that the City Planning Department and yourselves examine this application in the green belt and for the refusal of the present construction. It stands, if you look at the picture you've got in front of you, you would have something that stands well higher than the trees that are there. And it's an eyesore when it can be placed in the business park easily.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, just ask, are there any questions from the committee? Can't see any, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Take your comments into account. Next, then we've got Councillor Hook. Thank you. If you'd like to make a start.
Good evening. I'm Anne Hook, the Ward Councillor for Rural West York and also Parish Councillor in both Upper and Nether Poppleton Parish Councils. I've been reading the committee report and section 514 says that the proposed location for the mast is acceptable because there would be no direct overlooking from neighbouring housing. It neglects to say that the location is visible to all residents of the Poppletons as they enter or leave the villages by one or two of the 2 main access routes, and the mast will be a real eyesore despite the new paint colours. The much smaller tuk-tuk boxes on Station Road in Upper Poppleton are painted fir green, but they remain an eyesore because they're situated in the middle of a wide grass verge where they're easily seen. Looking at the site-specific supplementary information from the developer, I suppose, I know that section 5, the technical justification reason why site required, says in the second paragraph, the site is required to provide new 5G coverage for H3G LTE in order to improve coverage across Nether Poppleton. There is an irony there in that the optimum site location, if there were no residential buildings or other issues, is Orchard Road, which is in Upper Poppleton. There are therefore 2 questions which I would urge members to ask. Does this mean that there will shortly be another application for a second mast to provide coverage for Upper Poppleton because the location for the mast in the application has had to be sited in Nether Poppleton? Or has the applicant actually investigated the area in detail or just relied on Google, which, as we all know, is quite incorrect in that it says Upper Poppleton is in Nether Poppleton? If the applicant does not know the Poppletons well enough to know that Upper Poppleton is quite distinct from Nether Poppleton, with its own parish council and conservation area, how can they truly say that they have identified the best location for the antenna, which does not impede the view enjoyed by so many residents? Thank you.
Just ask if the committee have got any questions for Councillor Hook. Can't see any, so thank you, Councillor. Move on then to any further questions for officers. And if not, if we're happy to move into debate for a proposal, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I agree with everything the speaker has said about the appearance of these masts. They're not pretty. I sympathise, and I've got one looking out. I look out my back bedroom window onto one. They're not beautiful, but they are incredibly important because we rely so much on high quality internet access, and 5G is critical for that. Now, in this case, the green belt is irrelevant, I believe. I'll just check with officers that is correct. Green belt aspects are not a matter we can consider.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. Because this isn't a planning application. It's just considering the details that you can't consider green belts.
I can now. So clearly that they have prior approval. I thought that was the case. So we can't consider the green belt aspect. The height is important because 5G works slightly differently to 4G, and it doesn't pass through objects and it doesn't diffract around them. So if you don't have a considerable amount of height, you get shadows and dead spots. So it needs to be high. And I think the officers did a good job in getting up in 20 metres, which probably would have been excessive down to 15. So I'm comfortable with that. As for the business about York Business Park and the buildings on there, the buildings there have masts. They're much wider. They would actually obscure views from there. This is just a single pole with an antenna on the top. And the aspect of wind turbines isn't relevant because they don't have prior approval, so they are subject to green belt considerations. So, I mean, speaking personally, I sympathise with the residents, but I just don't see any way that this planning committee can actually refuse this application. So I'll move approval.
Thank you. Is anybody willing to second that? Councillor Galvin? Any further debate? If not, no.
So it's been moved that prior approval be granted, subject to the conditions as outlined on page 7.
Thank you. And Angela, if you could conduct the vote, please.
Yeah, just indicate whether you're for or against or abstaining when I call your name. Councillor Craighill.
Abstain.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Sorry to disappoint the population of Upper Poppleton, but for.
Councillor Daubney.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Galvin. For. Councillor Orrell.
For.
Councillor Perrott. Councillor Wardby. For. Councillor Webb.
For.
And Chair.
For.
And that's one abstention, 9 for. That's approved.
Okay, thank you. So that is approved. Move on then to the next item, which is the access way between 4 and 6 Howard Street. 40 minutes would be enough.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a planning application for the erection of a 1-bedroom dwelling above the access way between 4 and 6 Howard Street in Fulfordgate ward. On the screen is the drawings. We've got the site plan and the floor plan. So Howard Street, the two adjacent Victorian dwellings. And this access way gives vehicle access to a site to the rear, known as, I get it wrong now, 79 Fulford Road, which is currently being developed out as residential. The first floor shows a living room, kitchen, and then a bedroom, a single bedroom at second floor level. within what would appear as roof space. Front elevation, so the retained or a retained access. Front elevation, the rear elevation, which does project about 1.5 meters beyond the rear elevation of the adjacent dwellings. Section 3. Photograph of Howard Street and the access way. Sorry, I am aware of at the bottom of the list of speakers, there's a written representation by one of the residents of Howard Street, and we have received 2 other comments to the planning comments inbox today, but having read them, they don't raise any issues that aren't already covered in the report.
Thank you. Members got any questions at this point for officers? Can't see any, so we're able then to move on to our public speakers, and our first speaker is Nick Pears. Would you like to take a seat, please? You found the green button. So.
Yep. Oh.
Can
you hear me?
No, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Shall I move to another station?
No, I think that's okay then. Yeah, you'll have heard before you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and then sort of hang on just in case any questions.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name's Nick Pears and I live at 6 Howard Street. Thanks for letting me speak against this proposal. I'm representing house numbers 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 17, 21, 23, 27, 29 and Gardener's Cottage, the new coach house residence. The council categorises Howard Street as a non-designated heritage asset. If we choose not to preserve a street of this quality, what kind of precedent does that set for other similar streets in York? In terms of heritage preservation, Howard Street houses are 140 years old and constructed in mirrored pairs. The infill will break this symmetry and stand out as a modern second phase build. The adjacent properties 4 and 6 are built as end dwellings with decorative overhanging eaves. This will make the infill look opportunistic, especially with its narrower width. Also, the adjacent coach house redevelopment is a radical departure from what was approved and now is a blend of traditional and ultramodern. This is not heritage asset preservation, and residents have no confidence that the same won't happen to the infill. In terms of highway safety and convenience, the infill will severely compromise an essential turning point in the street. When the end of the cul-de-sac is occupied, there will be inevitable reversing down one of the tightest streets in York. It will be a complete disaster. We urge that the full width of the access lane is left intact. It is then possible for 2 cars to pass each other with careful design of the swept paths. This will not be possible when the lane is narrowed. And if such a bottleneck is put in place, then cars, cycles and pedestrians are all put in a head-on conflict with each other. Head-on car conflicts will take place across a pavement that is the main route to a children's play park at the top of the cul-de-sac. In terms of outdoor privacy, nearby residences will be compromised to much worse extent than if this were a regular infill, because the living quarters are at a raised first floor level. Privacy intrusions include full-length glazed doors, a bay window, and an even higher roof terrace overlooking all of the rear gardens of Northern Howard Street. Quoting from the council's document for home alterations, balconies and roof gardens will only normally be acceptable when they overlook public or communal areas or areas of neighbouring gardens that are not typically used for sitting out.
30 seconds.
In conclusion, this proposal generates a trivial increase in housing stock, yet it damages an important York heritage asset, removes highway convenience, compromises highway safety, and prevents current residents from enjoying the privacy of their outdoor space. All Howard Street homeowning residents are against this. Nobody supports it. The applicant already has 9 residential units approved on this site and is looking to add another in the coach houses, all accessed by Howard Street. Residents urge the committee to reject this proposal for a more equitable balance of interests. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. I'll just ask the committee if anybody has a question. I can't see any, so thank you for your time this evening. We can move on then to Gabby Higgs, who's the architect.
Hello everyone, I'm Gabby Higgs. I'm the architect for this development. And I think that I'd like to just emphasize that I've been working on this site since 2017, and I believe that the current proposals are a true reflection of an evolution of a design that has been undertaken to meet all the concerns that have been raised over that time. The application site, as you know, is part of a wider development, the Fulford Road Arches. And initially, the applicant proposed the access directly off Fulford Road. This was objected to by highways and local councils and local residents who asked that the Howard Street be used as the main access to the site. And following this, the applicant redesigned the whole scheme, the whole wider scheme, to take on board that request from York Council, highways, residents and councillors to make Howard Street the access. Having done that, also at the time, York Council Planning and Conservation gave advice as to what might be suitable on the site, and they advised that a duplex over carriageway would go some way to be an acceptable solution with provisions about the design, etc. Therefore, the whole scheme was redesigned to make Howard Street the vehicular access as requested, and instead of an infill house, which was the original proposal, a 1-bed duplex was proposed now in line with York Council. We're aware that this received a lot of comments and objections, and so therefore we further amended the design to take those on board. By the way, I put a flyer out for you, partly because I'm hard of hearing and because to remind you of what we did. All the things that we did that were requested by the residents, we did. So the gate was removed, so there was free access over the site. The entrance of the duplex was moved to the rear so that the frontage could be used for car turning, and a refuse collection point if required. Single rear extension was removed to widen the access way. Existing boiler flue is accommodated, and the ridge eave sign is lowered and the dormer window removed. All these were requests for the use of a private site by residents, which we took on board, basically so that the functioning of the street can continue as existing, even though we're providing accommodation on the site.
30 seconds.
Pardon?
30 seconds left.
30 seconds, anyway. So I want to say that all these changes have been done with the view to try to address every objection and comment that was raised. The proposed duplex not only provides a new dwelling, but is the gateway into Chelmsford Place and thus contributes to placemaking. The applicant has taken on board local councillors' comments, residents' requests, officers' advice, carefully revising the design throughout the process, working collaboratively in line with NPPF. Therefore, the current proposals meet all planning policy, provide a starter home on the brownfield site, and they do no harm to the adjacent properties or the prevailing townscape, as outlined in the inspector at the appeals report. Thank you.
Thank you. Members have any questions? Councillor Forshaw.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for coming and speaking to us. This is quite an unusual application, but in some ways it perhaps is similar to an application we saw a few weeks ago, where half of a bungalow was being demolished, and we had a lot of conversation about the party wall between the two properties. Now, in this situation, my guess is that the owners of the two properties on either side, their boundary comes to the edge of their walls. So could you just explain, first of all, how does this building stand
Yeah.
sort of next to that wall that
Yeah.
presumably they don't want to consent
Yeah.
you adding to.
Yeah.
And then also, I think one of the objections, which I think is a very fair point, is that the living accommodation of this property will be next to the bedroom accommodation
Yeah.
on the two adjoining properties. So what
Yeah.
sort of sound attenuation or dampening will there be in the building that will protect
Yeah, of course.
noise from
Yeah.
you know the living quarters?
Yeah, of course, both these are not really planning issues, but obviously considered within any design. So you're right, the building would be freestanding, it wouldn't actually be touching those buildings, so we'd have to leave a small gap between, and that would be to give it its own structural integrity. How it would be built and how it would be done structurally, obviously would be done by an engineer, but there are ways of doing that which would not harm either building or touch either building, and that would be something that would be done post-planning. Acoustic separation also would there be ensured by a gap, but would it be reinforced by acoustic linings on both sides? And I think that so it wouldn't do any harm to adjacent properties, and it's feasible to be done without, it's not a party wall issue, which is also not a planning issue, but it can be built in that way.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher. Councillor Franklin.
Thank you. You say that this will be built with a gap. Now, whilst the
Sorry,
party-
could you speak louder for me, please?
Sorry, I do apologise. You say there will be a gap between the wall of the proposed new property and the existing ones. Whilst the Party Wall Act is not a consideration, surely the maintenance of the existing properties and the the maintenance of their walls and possible repointing is a relevant consideration.
Yeah, it would, yeah, you're talking about, it wouldn't be a party wall, it's only a party wall issue if you excavate below the ground, below the level of the adjoining foundations.
But would there be sufficient space for the existing properties to be able to maintain their property and regrout it or do whatever maintenance
Sorry,
is
I
necessary?
can't hear you.
It's okay, I'll leave it, it's not.
So is it about the foundations and the party wall?
No, it's about the access for the existing residents to maintain their properties.
I'm not sure about that. No, there wouldn't be, because a part of it is accommodating, for example, a flue shaft or the boiler flues, and that would have to have access points along it, but they wouldn't be accessing their wall. You mean the wall, because it's not actually a gap, it's just a gap with a filler, so it becomes an infill of the property, if I can put it like that. It's not going to be a maintenance issue because there won't be any maintenance required. Can I put it like that?
Thank you.
It will be hidden by the other building.
Okay, Councillor Crackhill.
Yes, thank you. I've got just a couple of questions. Try and speak up. The first one is just, I may have misunderstood something, if you could just clarify. I'm looking at the front elevation and it looks to me like there is an entrance door into the new building to the right of the archway. Is that correct?
There is a door that's going to enter what would be either a cycle store or a refuse store.
I see. And then the entrance to go upstairs is at the back.
That's right.
But there is a door facing onto the street. So that is correct.
There is a door facing on the street. It was felt that that maintained the rhythm of the street.
Right.
And the door, it's an enclosure behind it, which will be for refuse or cycle storage, to be decided by the.
Okay, thank you. So
ancillary space.
Yeah, I see. I understand that. So my second question is, I've lost my notes, but I think I know what I want to say. Is about how you're going to build this building, how you're actually going to do the construction in the street. I'm just wondering if you can clarify, where will the contractors' vehicles be parked? Where will the waste skips be placed? Where will the construction materials be stored? Where will all those things go, given that you've more or less finished building the development through the archway, so you won't have that space available? I'm just really quite concerned, how are you going to avoid the whole of Howard Street becoming a building site while you construct the building?
Yeah, so how the properties developed today have been using the access way to be built. And so it's obviously, this is not, it's beyond the stage I'm at with the design, with the applicant, but it will be built, I would imagine, from that way out, working your way out of the site. So the applicant owns the site behind, and the wider site can be used for storage of materials, waste removal, all the things that you mentioned. And then maybe we'd be looking at something that was prefabricated, something that could be done quite low tech and lightweight, that could be built and brought in. There would be a construction management plan created to address all those issues.
Okay, there isn't one conditioned at the moment, but
yeah.
But there isn't going to be much room inside the site, is there? I think some of the site is already occupied.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
There is, yeah. And that site, as the lane is wide enough to put a skip on one side and have a car during the construction process, for example. It is a private site. It is a private site. It has been used as a lane, but it accessed a garage in the past. And I feel that the ownership of the site has been we've really tried to give people what they wanted on that site, which is basically not private. It's a private land, and we've tried to accommodate everything to give people access to and from. But if there was a construction going on, it would have to be managed within the land of the site. If we can put it like that, because there's space to do it. On the basis that at the moment, I think one person is a resident in Chelmsford Cottages, the Gardener's Cottage. And obviously they bought into the development. They want the development to be finished to a good quality. And the other thing that this duplex creates is it creates a passageway archway into the development. It is the entrance to their site. It creates a level of privacy between one place and another, and it heralds the entrance. And it's a device used right across York for developments in the backlands where you go through a building to get to it. The people who are living in that development will hopefully benefit from it.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up, sticking to my question? So you believe that you can do the construction without using the street, but still enabling residents in the street to access their properties?
The residents in the street, well,
around the back to their properties via their right of way.
Yeah, during the construction phase, there'd have to be a safety plan put in so that the cyclists from numbers 6, 7, 6, 8, 10 could get to their back gates. Everybody else can use the ginnel that's existing at the moment for 2 and 4. Sorry, I can't hear two things at the same time. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I respectfully didn't interrupt when you were speaking, but this is not a listed non-designated heritage asset. But the thing is, I'm trying to answer the questions with somebody speaking behind me.
Yes, I've asked him to stop.
Thank you. You have answered the question.
Thank you. Sorry. Well, it'd be managed carefully, and it would have to be considered, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Next, we've got Councillor Orrell and then Councillor Webb.
Hiya.
The street scene keeps going off, Chair.
Okay.
The photograph of the street scene is attractive brick fascias to the buildings. The report says that you're able to match this brickwork with the building.
No, we've been specifically asked not to match the brickwork with the building. The conservation officer requests that it stands apart from the street and is built in a plain stock brickwork. It must not match the building. That's one of the things that's being asked of us.
Chair, am I reading 5.7 wrong then?
The rhythm and the character, but the brick itself is to be a clamp brick to set it apart from the rest of the street, and it has to be set back to be subservient. And the brick would actually match the brick that's on the flank walls, not the front walls. So down the side of those buildings, it's the polychromatic brickwork on the front, and then it's got the plain bricks down the flank walls. And we've been asked to match the brick on the flank walls by the conservation officer.
I think that's what it says.
Okay, I've read it wrong.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to Councillor Fisher's point about how numbers 4 and 6 will access the side of the properties. You've just mentioned that the side bricks, for example, will be a particular colour, so that there's clearly a wall. So is it possible for someone to get, as this won't be attached, is it possible for someone to walk down the side of number 6 between your proposed property and number 6?
No, not above,
Thank you.
but I'm not sure that is a planning issue. I think it's a legal issue.
Okay. I can't see any further questions at that point, so thank you for your time this evening. Move on then to Michael Hamill. Okay, and if you'd like to start in your own time.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak in these difficult times. Can you hear me okay? Okay, this planning application is for a one-bedroom starter home on a sustainable city site. Despite 3 planning applications and 2 appeals, we are now heartened to know that we're finally being recommended for approval. We believe that now, more than ever, we should all be trying to rebuild our economy and house young first-time buyers. And we question why it's so difficult to build a starter home in York. So I'd just like to make 3 points, and I'll be very brief. 1, we have complied, as Gabby says, with every single requirement asked for by your planning and conservation officers in every single planning application for this site. We've made changes in line with the advice and recommendations we were given in good faith, thinking that we were involved in an inclusive dialogue with yourselves. This, of course, has cost thousands of pounds for new drawings, amendments, traffic reports, safety reports, and it's now made the scheme virtually unviable. So how have we got to this stage where York needs housing and is struggling to meet its housing targets? And this may be one small dwelling, but surely every single home is important. 2, you have in front of you, I hope, an email from the Conservation Officer dated 16th of June 2017, which is nearly 4 years ago, with his own recommendation highlighted. It was he who suggested a duplex apartment over the accessway. So given this encouragement, why wouldn't we expect to receive a consent if we followed all of his advice? And which as Gabby has outlined, we did, yet we were still refused. How was this allowed to happen? Is something going wrong with the planning process if it doesn't follow national and respected conservation officers' advice? The planning inspector, who the recent appeal decision destroyed every single reason put forward for the previous refusals. And this is now reflected in the officer's report you've heard already. So to conclude, we have followed every recommendation, spent a fortune on fees and reports for a one-bedroom starter home. So I hope that you will accept the officer's recommendation and approve this third application. Thank you.
Thank you. Just ask if members have any questions. Can't see any, so thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Members got any further questions for officers? Councillor Crawshaw.
I just wanted to confirm, so the first speaker, I think, said that the street were non-designated heritage assets. And then I think the second speaker said that they weren't. I think this seems to suggest that the conservation officer thought that they were non-designated heritage assets. So are they non-designated heritage assets or not? And then the second part to that question is, and apologies for this, but
I will forget the second part.
Oh, go on, do that, and I'll ask you the second question.
The conservation officer considered the buildings should be considered as designated, non-designated heritage assets, and then there's a part of the NPPF which tells you how to deal with such things. The appeal inspector took a contriview and didn't consider that they were. He said, yeah, but then he sort of qualified that by saying, notwithstanding the lack of any formal evidence, if Howard Street has been formally identified as a non-designated heritage asset, the advice provided in paragraph 197 of the NPPF will be applicable. This identifies that in weighing applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, a balanced judgment will be required having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and significance of the heritage asset. And he then went on to, except for the design of the front window and the dormer, he considered that the principle of development, so he didn't consider that the principle of development caused a loss of cohesion or necessarily caused demonstrable harm to the architectural integrity of the street. And we've, as officers, our professional judgment has been that we haven't felt that there is, I haven't felt that it would, we should go contrary to what the inspector decided on that decision. We don't feel that there's any other material grounds to come to a contrary decision to the one that he did.
I think you've answered my second question in that as well, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. It is on this the gable ends of the two adjoining properties that are adjoining but not adjoining. Obviously, is that a planning consideration in terms of clear loss of amenity of the neighbours who would no longer be able to look after their own property along that side wall? Would that be considered as a loss of amenity to those residents?
No, I don't think we could take that into account. We deal with a large number of applications for putting an extra building on the end of a terrace or making a detached, and that's not an issue. I think I'm not sure if the speaker mentioned it, but of course, if you're building something so close, then that the weathering, which is the whole reason for having to maintain, is taken out of the equation because it's deflected by the new building that's being built.
Okay, there's no further questions. If we can move that into debate. If anybody's willing to. That's the Crackhill, I think I saw.
I've just noticed the time, so I put my hand up right away. Yeah, I mean, I still have concerns about this application. You know, some of them relating to what the speaker on behalf of the residents, some of the things that he highlighted. I suppose my main ones though are the visual impact of the design. I don't agree that archway looks appropriate for the street, particularly with the door at the side, I'm afraid. I don't think that helps. I think it really detracts and makes a very negative visual impact on what is a particularly lovely street at the moment in heritage terms. And my other big concern, as I asked previously about, is how this will be constructed. And I suppose I say this with the background of experience of other applications in really difficult and tight situations that we've had around the city, where we've had horrendous experiences where the whole street is becoming a building site effectively, because there simply is no room for manoeuvre. And when those 9 are completed, which are getting that way, and looking at the alley, the passageway on the site visit, as some of us did, I really can't see how that is going to be managed without inflicting something of a nightmare on the residents in the street. So that would be my major concern, and I think it will be very difficult to overcome. I would also, though, if the committee is minded to approve, also want to add in a condition that there is a detailed construction management plan. The applicant already indicated that they thought there would be one. And I think, you know, although it's only for one dwelling, I think in this instance, the site is so tight that as an absolute minimum, there needs to be a very detailed construction management plan showing how this will be done, so it doesn't cause, you know, months of a nightmare situation for the residents in the street.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Chairman, I think this is a first for the city, and certainly I've never over the years seen an application of this type. Having said that, I think we have to be mindful of the last application that the inspector in essence turned down, but turned down on issues which now appear or seem to have been addressed. And I think however we might think it's, and I don't want to offend anybody, a slightly bizarre application, I really don't think with any option, I think we must accept or approve the application, because as sure as God made little apples, it will go to appeal. And if the appeal inspector then takes account of what the previous appeal inspector said, then it's going to, the appeal I suggest would be one with the possibility of costs. So I'm going to move the officer's recommendation, and I'll be interested to see it when it's done, because I think it's quite bizarre.
Thank you. Are you willing to second that, Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. I have to second it reluctantly, because I think it's a very flawed application, but I think the decision by Inspector Marchington has completely blown any potential refusals. I mean, my main concern is highways. I think he has totally got the highways issues wrong in his report. I just cannot agree with anything he says. But at the end of the day, he's made that decision. He's a professional planning inspector. I cannot see another planning inspector taking a different view on it. I've never known a planning inspector disagree with a previous judgment by one. So it's not a question of whether it can be built. That's, you know, another issue. It's not a planning issue. Should it be built? I'm not very happy with this as far as the street seems, but in terms of planning law, I don't think we have any alternative but to approve it.
Thank you. Councillor Crackhill mentioned earlier the construction management plan. We're happy to, Councillor Galvin, assume we are. Are you happy with the construction?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a proposal, Councillor Webb and then Councillor Crawford.
I'm sorry, but I cannot support approval for this development. I mean, the bin storage and the cycle storage is the same thing. I think that the living space of the residents at the proposal at the first floor is adjacent, I would imagine, to the bedrooms of the neighbours. So I think there's a loss of amenity for the neighbours there. I think there's a loss of amenity due to overlooking. I think there's a potential for a crime and disorder issue due to the fact that we're creating a shelter, an overhang, for example. I welcome what Councillor Crackhill said about a construction management plan, but I think it could quickly turn into a game of Tetris where everybody loses out, because I just don't think there's enough space to build a building which I have to say is novel in its construction, but I think it's going to take a a lot more work because of that novelty. And I think that that will be very difficult. So for those reasons, and I'm still not convinced about the side of the property. I do think that's unfair on other residents. And so for those reasons, I can't support approval.
Thank you, Councillor Caution.
Thanks, Chair. I think I wouldn't have a hesitation in seeking to refuse this if it weren't for the inspector's previous findings. And I think that puts us in a very, very difficult position. To my reading, paragraph 5.4, which sets out paragraph 127 of the MPPF. Well, does this add to the overall quality of the area? I don't think it does. Is it sympathetic to the local character and history? Maybe. I think it does optimise potential of the site to accommodate and sustain appropriate, but then at the same time, it's not delivering a high standard of amenity for the existing and future users. Because I think if you look at the design of the actual development, if you have friends round to this new accommodation, they've got to go up the stairs and through your bedroom to get to the toilet, which I don't think is particularly good in terms of amenity. And then if you put yourselves in the shoes of the two residents on either side, I'd be horrified if this was being built next to me. And so I kind of think as a local planning committee, if we can't protect those residents, then, you know, we might as well all go home on one level. But I completely agree. I agree with what Councillor Galvin said. I agree with what Councillor Fisher said, that it will almost, a refusal will almost certainly be appealed. Where does the inspector go when the appeal is? But I think we as a local planning committee have to stand our ground on these sorts of things. And I think we have to say, we don't think it meets these elements of paragraph 127. We don't think it's an appropriate development. So I can't support approving it. I know what the implication of that might be, but I can't support approving it.
Okay, Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. I look back to the application in Huntington that was approved a few weeks ago. I don't think anybody liked the idea, but it was approved because there were no planning reasons to refuse it. And I think we're in a very similar position. The residents in Huntington who were living next door to the area that was going to be knocked down would have far greater concerns than the residents in this situation. Their house isn't going to be knocked down next to it. They're going to have one built next to it. So inconsistency in a way, it's difficult to refuse this when the application in Huntington was accepted and approved. So I think Councillor Fisher is quite right that we don't have any planning reasons to refuse this.
No further comments then? I think if Gareth, if we could get a quick rundown. Sorry.
Can I just make the point about some comments about the difficulty in building it and the disruption in the streets? Not a planning consideration. I advise you very, very strongly about using that as a potential reason for refusal, because it's completely undefendable in terms of disruption during building work and how something can be built. It's not a planning issue.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I absolutely accept that, Gareth. And Councillor Orrell, that previous application, I don't think we had grounds not to approve. I think on this one, we do have planning grounds. Paragraph 127 states that development should achieve the criteria listed. And I think I've listed you 3 criteria that I don't believe it meets. So I think we could refuse on the basis of failing to meet paragraph 127 with listing of 3 grounds. So I don't think it's quite the same, but I do accept it's a fine balance on this one, and you know the inspector's previous judgment makes it difficult. I accept that.
Thank you. So Gareth, if you're able to.
It's been moved that that approval be granted subject to the conditions in the report, and a further condition regarding a construction management plan. I just seek clarification that it was regarding highways.
No, I think it should be very clear that it includes clarity on where contractors' vehicles will park, storage of construction materials, waste and deliveries, and still enabling access for all the relevant residents.
Yeah, that is the standard highways construction management.
Is that
plan
all in
covers-
there? As long as
covers
it's
those
all in
issues.
there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. it does.
Thank you. Angela, if you're able to.
Yeah, if you could just indicate whether you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Craghill,
Against.
Councillor Crawshaw,
Against.
Councillor Daubney,
Reluctantly, again, for.
Councillor Fisher,
Extremely reluctantly for.
Councillor Galvin,
Yes, similarly for.
Councillor Orrell,
For.
Councillor Perrott, against, Councillor Wardby,
For.
Councillor Webb,
Against.
and Chair.
For.
So that's 6 for, 4 against, and it was approved.
So that is approved. Okay, so thank you, everybody. That is the end of the agenda. So if you tell us we need to be out by 8, then we will finish at 8 and approved it. So thank you, everybody, for your time tonight, and to all the staff and officers that have worked so hard to make it all possible. We'll see you next time.